Chapter 147. Gong Dai seemed to be seduced as his eyes stared straight at her and his body gradually moved closer. Her posture of kneeling and bending over outlined the curves of her body. Gong Dai could not help but be infatuated with the thought that his royal sister had grown up, and could already be enjoyed. His Adam's apple moved. Before Gong Yimo could notice, he leaned over to the side of the pool and suddenly reached out to grab her. "What's wrong?" Gong Yimo forced a smile as she looked at him. She thought to herself that she had really seen a ghost these past few days. Why did everyone become so strange? The vigilance in her eyes deeply pierced Gong Dai. Obviously, he was the closest person to her. She should be able to accept him more easily, right? Closest and most loved were only one word apart. If he could be her closest relative, why couldn't he be her most loved? Gong Dai got up from the water and leaned forward to get closer to Gong Yimo. The smell of her body was so mesmerizing and sweet, like the smell of melted sugar. When he breathed it into his body, it turned into fire. He desired it so much. A long time ago, when he was drugged, he had desired it so much. Gong Yimo's hand hurt from his grip. Her heart began to feel uneasy. What kind of aphrodisiac could have such a strong effect? How much did he take? She was his royal sister. Actually, other than the initial strong effects of the aphrodisiac, it was within his tolerance range. That was why he was able to smoothly return to the residence and come to Gong Yimo's courtyard. But when he saw her, the aphrodisiac in his body seemed to suddenly explode. He became more and more unable to control himself. In his heart, he even thought that this was good. Using the aphrodisiac as an excuse, if he took her because of it, then he would be able to break through their relationship. What a perfect excuse. He had no choice. Gong Dai's eyes lit up and were filled with desire. He was getting closer and closer. Gong Yimo was already prepared. As long as he came closer, she would immediately run away. Although she might not be able to defeat Gong Dai, running away was not a problem. Her attitude was written all over her face. She no longer had any feelings for him. Otherwise, she wouldn't be like this. Gong Dai suddenly felt heartache. He loved someone so much, but even letting her know was an extravagant hope. He leaned closer to her and sighed softly. Before she could get up, he whispered, "Don't worry. When I came back, I already asked Lo Chi to make the antidote. Royal sister, you, go get it for me." Having said that, he loosened his grip slightly. Gong Yimo immediately jumped up and nodded her head hurriedly. "Don't worry. I'll get you the antidote right away." After that, he ran away quickly. Gong Dai sighed as he watched her leave. He couldn't be like Gong Che because Gong Yimo wouldn't accept him. She wouldn't accept her brother who was also her blood relative. He could not do anything to her that could not be undone. Once he did something, Gong Yimo would only run away. That was not what he wanted to see. Why was it so difficult to get someone? Gong Dai slowly walked out of the water. Step by step, he stumbled towards Gong Yimo's room. He buried himself in Gong Yimo's bed and took a deep breath. Her bed was raised high by her. Once he lay on it, it was soft and soft. However, that wasn't the main point. The main point was that the blanket was filled with her scent. That sweet scent enveloped him, causing him to sink deep into it. He almost went crazy. His hands clutched the blanket tightly. Suddenly, he let out a long howl. But he couldn't let it go. He couldn't. He only wanted Gong Yimo. Everything was Gong Yimo. After Gong Yimo ran out in a panic, she searched for Lo Chi for a while. At this moment, he was running over with a small box. She caught him red-handed. "Is this the antidote?" Lo Chi quickly nodded. "Quickly give it to Her Highness." Gong Yimo immediately took it from him. "Thank you. I'll go now." When Gong Yimo returned, she looked around the courtyard but didn't find anyone. Strange. Could it be that Gong Dai couldn't resist going out to relieve himself? Gong Yimo didn't know what to do with the antidote. At this moment, she heard a strange sound. She frowned and realized that the sound was coming from her room. Hence, she quickly walked towards the source of the sound. She walked slower and slower. Her footsteps were hesitant and her face was full of shock. This low moaning sound was Gong Dai's voice. But why did it sound like he was doing something that was not suitable for children? But there were so few girls in the entire Qi manor. Who had Gong Dai caught? She was suspicious. Her footsteps became lighter as she approached. That sound was lingering and intermittent. She listened with great effort for a long time. Then, she confirmed that it was indeed Gong Dai's voice. But she only heard a male voice and not a female voice. Which meant, cough cough, Gong Dai was doing it himself. Gong Yimo stood at the door, feeling a little embarrassed. Should she send the antidote in or not? It would be too awkward to send it in now. It's better not to do it. After hesitating for a while, she prepared to leave. But then she thought of something and revealed a naughty smile. She had never encountered such a situation before. She didn't expect that Gong Dai, who was usually such a cold person, would cry out like this. After hesitating for a moment, her curiosity won out. She sneakily inched closer, afraid that Gong Dai would discover her. Then, she held her breath and continued to eavesdrop in a very wretched manner. This feeling of being a thief made her heart beat wildly. Moreover, the other party's moaning sound really made her blush. Royal sister. These two sudden words made Gong Yimo's body tremble. She abruptly straightened her body. Her face was red all the way to her neck. Then, she turned around and ran. She thought that Gong Dai had discovered her and warned her. So, as she ran, she thought, how did Gong Dai become so powerful? Her qinggong was top-notch, but with this top-notch qinggong and holding her breath, he still noticed her outside the door. Oh my God! She patted her red face and calmed her violent heartbeat. She panted slightly and finally sighed. Eavesdropping was actually discovered by the person involved. How could she have fun in the future? But she ran too fast. She completely didn't expect that Gong Dai didn't just shout once. He even called her name after that. He kept calling her name. She also didn't notice that when Gong Dai called out royal sister, those two words were said with such a lingering tone. It was just two words, but it was as if he had sucked them on the tip of his tongue countless times. That kind of passion. Royal sister. Gong Yimo. Gong Dai had already lost consciousness. He could only repeat those few words to relieve himself. At the last moment, he sighed deeply and slowly opened his eyes. There would be a day when he would make her willingly submit to him on this bed. Chapter 148. The next day, the news of the Crown Prince's wedding spread like wildfire. Although the imperial edict had not been issued yet, everyone was talking about it. Gong Yimo leaned over a small table in the tea house and heard the news. She was so shocked that she immediately sat up. Gong Che was going to marry Su Miaolan. Don't tease me, okay? She was at a loss. No matter how she thought about it, she could not figure it out. When did Gong Che become so familiar with Su Miaolan? There was even news of him personally appointing her as his imperial concubine. At this moment, Gong Dai walked towards her. Royal sister, are you talking about this shop's cloud cake? After the previous incident, Gong Dai was probably afraid that she would feel awkward, so he acted as if nothing had happened. He did not mention anything about her eavesdropping, which made her heave a sigh of relief. Today, when he heard that she was going out, Gong Dai was worried. Since he had nothing to do, he went out with her. When they passed by the hawker shop that Gong Che pointed to last time, Gong Yimo had an idea and asked him to buy some of the cloud cake that was rumored to have been sold in the capital for more than 20 years. Gong Yimo ate a piece with an indescribable expression. She felt that it was too greasy. With this level of sweetness, could it be that it was not a sugar cake? Gong Dai sat down opposite her and poured himself a cup of tea. They were now in a simple disguise. Otherwise, with Gong Dai's face that was becoming more and more enchanting as he grew up, they would be surrounded by people. What's wrong? Seeing that her mood was not right, Gong Dai looked up and asked. At this moment, his hand was holding the cup. His fair fingers and the rough sand bowl formed a sharp contrast. Even though he looked ordinary now, when those black jade-like eyes glanced at him, there was a kind of seductive beauty. Gong Yimo was shaken by those fingers. She lowered her head and pondered, why did Crown Prince Gij appoint Su Miaolan as his imperial concubine? I can't figure it out. Her words made Gong Dai's pupils shrink. Then, He slowly smiled. Maybe it was love at first sight. His words made Gong Yimo even more confused. Let Su Miaolan marry Gong Che? She was really unwilling. Although the imperial edict had not been issued yet, it seemed to be a done deal. But why did it have to be Su Miaolan? There were so many women in the capital. Why did it have to be her? Could this be the legendary fate? Seeing that Gong Yimo seemed to have something on her mind, Gong Dai narrowed his eyes as if he knew what she was thinking. Royal sister doesn't want the crown prince to marry? Or do you just not want him to marry Su Miaolan? Gong Yimo was surprised by his keen senses. After a while, she nodded shyly. I don't want him to marry Su Miaolan. Her words made Gong Dai slightly happy, but Gong Yimo said again. Can you help me send a letter to the Empress? Gong Dai's expression was indescribable. The crown prince finally chose a woman. No matter what you say, royal sister, she won't change her mind, right? Gong Yimo gritted her teeth. I'll try. No. I can only say that it's their fate. Gong Dai pondered for a moment and nodded. Gong Yimo was a little surprised, but Gong Dai smiled slightly. This smile seemed to disperse the cold air. Whatever royal sister wants to do, I will do it for you. For a moment, Gong Yimo was very moved. She didn't raise this child in vain. On the same afternoon, the Empress received Gong Yimo's letter. It was only a few sentences. Will the promise of that day be fulfilled today? The crown prince's marriage must be with the Su family. The Empress lamented in her heart. She was afraid that Gong Che would suddenly break the engagement, but before Che did anything, Gong Yimo wrote a letter to her. She understood Gong Yimo's intentions. In the beginning, she had knelt down and begged Gong Yimo to plead on Che's behalf. She had promised to bring up this request in the future. She didn't expect Gong Yimo to bring it up now. She handed the letter to Water Deity. Water Deity looked at it and frowned slightly, as if she didn't understand. According to the princess, it seems that as long as it's not the Su family's daughter, anyone is fine. The Empress had a headache, but Che said those words to the Su family's daughter in public. If he doesn't marry her, won't he make enemies? Water Deity pondered for a moment. When His Highness was drunk, how could his drunken words count? Moreover, His Highness didn't go to His Majesty to ask for a marriage decree these days. I'm afraid he's regretting it. The Empress thought for a moment and said, Hong Xiu. I'm here. She handed the letter in her hand to her and said, send this letter to the Crown Prince and explain the reason. Everything should be decided by him. Yes. Eastern Palace. Crown Prince, you can't. The Crown Prince's subordinate, Xu Sheng, knelt in front of Gong Che with a serious face. That Su Miaolan is the Marquis' only legitimate daughter and is deeply loved by the Marquis. If His Highness breaks the engagement, won't the Marquis lose face? Gong Che stood with his hands behind his back and didn't look at the people at his feet. I won't marry. As for the Marquis, I'll personally go and apologize. It's my fault for the slip of the tongue after drinking. Seeing his insistence, Xu Sheng looked at the others. After the other advisors looked at each other, they all knelt down. Crown Prince, please reconsider. Gong Che was unmoved and continued to walk out. At this moment, Hong Xiu came over. Seeing the situation, she didn't say a word. Instead, she knelt down and attached a letter. Gong Dai hesitantly opened the letter. Gong Yimo's handwriting made him suddenly happy. However, the content made him slightly absent-minded. Everyone, leave. He ordered. Everyone looked at each other, and then they all retreated obediently. In the conference hall, only Gong Che and Hong Xiu were left. Seeing that everyone had left, Hong Xiu explained the matter to the Crown Prince. When Gong Che heard it, he suddenly laughed and sat on the armchair at the side. He knew that the Empress had begged Gong Yimo to help. He also knew that his Empress mother owed Gong Yimo a favor. However, she actually used such an opportunity exchanged with the position of princess, to make such a request. Tell me, why doesn't she like Su Miaolan? The Crown Prince asked blankly. His eyes were empty, as if he was absent-minded. However, the pain in his eyes moved Hong Xiu. She lowered her head and thought for a while. I heard that Princess and Miss Su had a conflict before. I think. Princess doesn't like her. Yes. I don't like her. Gong Che also thought of this and suddenly laughed. You don't like her, so you want me to marry someone else? Ha ha ha. Gong Yimo, what do you think I am? What do you think I am? You don't care at all. You can't wait to let me marry someone else. You really don't have a trace of love for me. He closed his eyes, and the sudden increase in his voice gave Hong Xiu a fright. She lowered her body and said in a trembling voice, Your Highness, please calm down. Her Majesty means, it's all up to Your Highness now. She will respect your wishes. No need. That's all. Hasn't my crown princess been decided long ago? Gong Dai sneered and read the letter again as if he was torturing himself. The more he read, the more he wanted to laugh. Just a few words, completely ignoring his feelings. She doesn't want me to marry Su Miaolan, but I want to. Hong Xiu saw the crown prince's face turn pale and his eyes red. She couldn't help but advise him in a sorrowful voice. Your Highness, please don't let your emotions affect your decisions. Please think thrice before you act. Think thrice. Gong Dai's hand clenched the letter tightly and smiled. His smile was so cold and miserable. There's nothing to think thrice. She was willing to use such an opportunity to make such a request. Perhaps, if I marry Su Miaolan, she will give me another look. Chapter 149. After speaking, Gong Che strode out without caring about Hong Xiu's shock. He was going to ask for an imperial decree to marry Su Miaolan. The moment Su Miaolan received the imperial decree, she couldn't believe it was true. After waiting for a few days, she was actually prepared for Gong Che to break the engagement. She even thought that if Gong Che really broke the engagement, she would force the marriage with her death. Anyway, she had already done this much. If she didn't marry Gong Che, she would really be the laughingstock of the capital. But she didn't expect that the crown prince would really marry her. She was the real crown prince's wife. When Gong Yimo heard this, she was speechless for a long time. At this time, the empress's reply was also passed to her. The general idea was that she didn't do it this time. Next time, she would try her best, but she didn't want anything. She just didn't want Su Miaolan to marry Gong Che. She had already let go of many things in her previous life, but she couldn't let go for a long time. Why did Su Miaolan still marry Gong Che in the end? Was this fate? If the path was the same no matter how she changed it, would she still be killed by Gong Dai in the end? Then she laughed. How could it be? Didn't she save Shun Shiyi and Empress Liu? Speaking of Shun Shiyi, she almost forgot that she still owed Shun Shiyi a meal of wine. It was time to make it up to him. Recently, Gong Dai was busy with military affairs and didn't have much time to accompany her. She could sneak out to play with Shun Shiyi. Shun Shiyi was now the left guard of the imperial army. He was in charge of the affairs in the city and had 10,000 people under him. Naturally, he wasn't as free as before. But if Gong Yimo wanted to see him, there was still a way. At night, Shun Shiyi returned to the residence tiredly. Thanks to Gong Yimo, his father was so frightened by the head in his hand that he lost control of his bladder. After seeing who it was, he cried out and flew into a rage. This shock and anger was forcibly stopped after seeing the gold medal in Shun Shiyi's hand and the old lady's cold face. He was so depressed that he was bedridden. Now, he could be considered half a cripple. Therefore, Shun Shiyi had the final say in this Wangfu. Usually, no one was allowed to enter his room. Therefore, after he entered the room, he poured himself a cup of tea. However, the lingering fragrance of a woman on the teacup surprised him. Who is it? Hey! There was a burst of laughter, and the pleasant laughter rang out in the silent night, making his scalp tingle. Before Shun Shiyi could react, a pair of hands covered his eyes, and a playful female voice pressed against his ear and asked, "Guess who I am?" After confirming who it was, all of Shun Shiyi's anger turned into a smile. He revealed his white teeth and snorted in an extremely irritating tone. I was wondering who it was. It turns out to be a despicable person who doesn't keep his word. Gong Yimo removed her hand and glared at him. Who are you calling a villain? Shun Shiyi looked back and saw that it was indeed her. His eyebrows were slightly smiling as he crossed his chest and sneered condescendingly. Whoever doesn't fulfill their promise after returning to the capital is a villain. Seeing that he was angry, Gong Yimo smiled and took out 2 leather bags from her bosom. Am I that kind of person? You're lucky today. This is the best wine used by the imperial palace. There are only a dozen jars a year. Shun Shiyi subconsciously took one of the leather bags. The smooth leather still had Gong Yimo's body temperature. He didn't know what to think, but his cheeks turned slightly red. Humph. This little wine is not enough for this young master to drink. Don't talk big. Gong Yimo rolled her eyes. This wine was improved by this young lady. I guarantee that you won't be able to get up from work tomorrow. As she spoke, she sat down at the table. Shun Shiyi remembered that Gong Yimo was a glutton, so he went out to order some food and wine before coming in. Today, he was considerate and reliable. Compared to the past, he was much better. Finally able to sit down and chat, Gong Yimo was not restrained. She looked around and wondered, I wanted to ask you last time. You're already so old. Even brother Crown Prince is getting married. Why aren't you married yet? This matter could be said to be the matter that everyone in King Ping's residence was most worried about. Shun Shiyi was almost 20 years old. Every time his grandmother saw him, she would nag at him. In the end, she would definitely cry a few times. It was really annoying. He raised the bag of wine and drank directly. In the end, he almost spat it out. The wine was still the Jade Pear Workshop's tribute wine that he was familiar with. But why was the taste so much more spicy? This mouthful made his jade face flush red. Under his thick eyebrows, his large eyes became watery. Gong Yimo laughed proudly and took a small sip. She narrowed her eyes and said, How is it? In order to accept your invitation, I brought all the best wine from the bottom of my chest. But looking at you, it seems that you can't take it. Who are you saying can't take it? Shun Shiyi resisted the urge to stick out his tongue and glared at her. That look was really seductive, causing one's heart to flutter. Looking at his beauty, Gong Yimo took another sip of the strong wine, as if this was the only way to wash away the faint unhappiness in her heart. Shun Shiyi panted a few times. Seeing Gong Yimo drinking sullenly, although there was a smile on her face, he was still keenly aware of her unhappiness. He hissed and said angrily, You're still talking about me. Aren't you almost 14 years old? In this city, which girl hasn't been married at the age of 14? Do you want to keep yourself as an old maid? Gong Yimo waved her hand impatiently. I want to be an old maid. Besides, if I get married, there won't be anyone to drink with you. Have you thought it through? Shun Shiyi raised his eyebrows and said in an extremely dismissive tone. So what? Why don't you just marry me? As soon as he finished speaking, Gong Yimo's pair of beautiful eyes glanced at him, as if trying to discern whether he was joking or being serious. Shun Shiyi didn't dare to look at her. He shook the wine bag in his hand and said, Marry this young master. I don't dare to say anything else, but this young master will take care of Jade Pear Lane's tribute wine. Gong Yimo burst out laughing. She patted him on the shoulder and said, Just based on your words, if I want to marry in the future, I'll definitely consider you. She was originally joking, but Shun Shiyi's ears turned red. He, who had always been fearless, didn't dare to think too deeply about the truth in her words. After 30 minutes of drinking, Gong Yimo ate her fill with wine, dishes, and pastries. Shun Shiyi's eyes were also slightly red. It was obvious that he was a little drunk. Now that the capital is making it difficult for you to move around, in the future, what do you want to do? Hearing his worried words, Gong Yimo waved her hand carelessly. Since this young master can't stay here, there will be other places for me. Why bother? Chapter 150. Shun Shiyi snorted as he thought about how Gong Dai was so protective of Gong Yimo in private. It wasn't that Shun Shiyi hadn't gone to look for her, but he was stopped by someone. If you want to leave, I'm afraid you can't. Why? Isn't it because you have a good brother? Shun Shiyi sneered. He's a good person, but unfortunately, he can't protect you now. His expression turned serious as he said this. The last time I went to look for you, I didn't manage to see you because Gong Ju was keeping a close eye on you. However, I sent someone to keep watch for a long time and found a suspicious person. Unfortunately, they didn't catch him. Gong Yimo snorted as she lay on the table. She wasn't listening to him seriously. Shun Shiyi couldn't help but sigh. How did he fall for such a careless girl? You have a special status now. If you're not careful, you'll be destroyed. Can't you be more serious? Gong Yimo looked up at him. It's the same whether I'm on guard or not. Besides, I have bigger dreams. I don't have time to care about these twists and turns. Shun Shiyi teased, marry yourself off soon? Gong Yimo looked up at him with disdain. No. I won't think about these messy things as long as I don't achieve my dreams. Her words surprised Shun Shiyi. What are your thoughts? Tell me about them. Perhaps it was because she had drunk too much. Gong Yimo didn't have much to worry about. She leaned closer to him and said mysteriously, I'm thinking a lot. I want the 4 countries to open up trade and wealth to come from everywhere. Shun Shiyi was about to laugh at her for being a moneygrubber when she continued. I want Lu Yi to not have to harass our great Yu and Yuheng every day because of a lack of food and clothing. I want Yuheng to not have to be sandwiched between 2 large countries, where it's as difficult as ascending to the heavens for its citizens to walk out of that narrow space. I want Yuchi to not have to think that there's a woman in power, and that there's endless internal strife and the flames of war everywhere. I want every small country in the surrounding area to not have to worry and fear, and to have to contribute most of their labor to steal peace. She stood up and waved her hand heroically. She looked at him as if she could see the vast and endless land through him. Of course, this is what I want the most. It's for our Daiyu state to start a new chapter of prosperity. All hardworking people will be able to live a prosperous life. The old will have someone to rely on and the young will have talents. Then, in the decades that I'm here, don't have wars. Her words caused Shun Shiyi to be stunned. He didn't expect to hear such words. Her words caused his mind to suddenly become chaotic. Gong Yimo looked at Shun Shiyi's expression and laughed with her hands on her hips. Don't you think that I'm too arrogant for boasting in front of you right now? Ha ha ha. She stopped laughing and looked at Shun Shiyi. Her eyes were watery and there was a hint of sadness in her expression. But what should I do? This is really all I want. I don't want to like someone. It will numb my mind and make me narrow-minded. I don't want to get married. That small space is not my world. People often say that a woman's home is a hero's grave, but men's charms can lead people astray. Speaking of this, she didn't look serious again. With one hand on the table and the other on Shun Shiyi's chin, she said with a smirk on her face. It's just like your face. It's so seductive. It makes people unconsciously biased when they see it. Shun Shiyi's heart couldn't calm down. He couldn't understand how a woman could have such thoughts in this world. No, no, no. Not only women, but even men would not do that. When men set up their careers in the world, they would usually only consider their own country. But she was different. She even wanted to help other countries. This idea was not acceptable to the world. No one would trust her. If it was an ordinary person, it would be fine. But it was a woman with such amazing talent like her. This kind of idea would only bring disaster to her. No one in any country would understand that it was impossible to do such a thing. You must be thinking that I'm in a fantasy. Shun Shiyi heard her suddenly calm voice and looked up in surprise. But he bumped into her pair of sparkling eyes. His heart stopped and he almost forgot to breathe. Gong Yimo's cheeks turned red and then she smiled. I will do it. I may not be able to do everything, but I will try my best to reach the limit. Just wait. One day, I will invite you to drink Yuchi's cloud ginger wine. I will do what I say. With that, she seemed to groan and softly fall down. Shun Shiyi hurriedly caught her. Seeing that she was only drunk, he suppressed his fear and smiled. But with you like this, when will I be able to marry you? Just as he was holding Gong Yimo and was about to put her on the bed, a cold wind blew and a cold sword was placed on his neck. His originally good mood turned cold. Gong Dai's face was even colder than his as he appeared behind him. Put her down. There was obviously no emotion, but that voice seemed to be able to seep out ice. Shun Shiyi sneered, what if I say no? As soon as his words fell, Gong Dai's sword left a bloody mark on his neck. No. You can go to hell. Just as the killing intent was running rampant, Gong Yimo suddenly moaned and moved uncomfortably in his arms. Shun Shiyi looked at her and a trace of tenderness and helplessness flashed through his eyes. He gently placed her on the bed. Sometimes I am really curious. She is only your sister. You are watching her too closely. After putting down Gong Yimo, Shun Shiyi turned around and looked at Gong Dai, who was emitting a cold aura. He laughed mockingly. Or, do you have some unspeakable thoughts about your sister? His words made Gong Dai suddenly very nervous as he looked at Gong Yimo. Seeing that she was still sleeping soundly, his eyes narrowed and a trace of killing intent appeared. Between me and royal sister, there is no need for an outsider like you to interfere. Outsider? Shun Shiyi saw that the sword was still on his neck, but he was not afraid and crossed his arms over his chest. What if I marry her? Hiss. The narrow sword made a deep gash on his neck, and blood immediately gushed out. Gong Dai coldly looked at the way he squatted down and covered his wound. He faintly smiled. His cold eyes were like a demon's that could enchant people's eyes. Royal sister. As long as she has me, it's enough. Gong Dai's slightly cold eyes revealed a trace of gentleness. He tilted his head and looked at Shun Shiyi. He faintly smiled. As for you, if I remember correctly, you have a very close grandmother. His words made Shun Shiyi's eyes widen. You dare. I dare. Gong Dai looked down at him with an extremely cold and condescending expression. A trace of cruelty flashed across his face. If you want to steal the most important person to me, why can't I kill the person closest to you? The last syllable was accompanied by a sudden smile. His godlike appearance actually left Shun Shiyi speechless. Chapter 151. Gong Yimo was carried home by Gong Dai. The cold wind blew against his robes, but he protected Gong Yimo so that she did not feel the slightest bit of coldness. Looking at her quiet little face, Gong Dai smiled faintly. How could he not know how many gazes were fixed on him? Almost every night, there would be a massacre in the Qi Manor, and the next day, there would be many corpses thrown into the mass grave. Those who were spying on him all wanted to know about his royal sister. He was even more aware that sending the royal sister away at this time was the best decision, but he did not want to. He deeply hated his own incompetence. Little did he know how much pressure he had put on himself. However, no matter how monstrous a 13-year-old youth was, it was impossible for him to be a match for the entire imperial city. Looking at Gong Yimo's peaceful sleeping face, Gong Dai sighed softly. What should I do with you? After returning to the manor, Lo Qi glanced at Gong Yimo and said in a low voice, the arrangements have been made. The other party said that in less than 3 days, Li Ku will undoubtedly die. Gong Dai nodded, indicating that he understood, and walked towards Gong Yimo's courtyard. Li Ku's recent days had been very difficult. Although he was the legitimate son of the Minister of Revenue, his status could be considered honorable, and he had recently been greatly supported by imperial concubine Long. Even if others were angry, at most they would make him suffer a little. It was very difficult to truly take his life. However, Gong Dai was different. From the moment he returned to the capital, he had been thinking about how to take his dog life. Now, all he had to do was wait for news of his death. This was the only good news during this period of time. After placing Gong Yimo on the bed, he let out a sigh of relief. Thinking that Gong Yimo seemed to be unhappy about Su Miaolan marrying Gong Che during the day, he felt a little vexed. Originally, he thought that it would be good for Su Miaolan to marry Gong Che, and he would be happy to facilitate it. However, Gong Yimo's unwillingness made him hesitate. In any case, as long as Gong Che got married, it did not matter if it was Su Miaolan or not. Since the royal sister did not like her so much, should he just make her disappear? However, if Su Miaolan died, what would he do if Gong Che took the opportunity to not marry again? He sat beside Gong Yimo's bed and frowned slightly. It was only at this moment that he felt like a young man. The troubles of worrying about personal gains and losses were a path that everyone had to go through as they grew up. Gong Yimo slept soundly. She frowned and smacked her lips as if she was dreaming of delicious food. Gong Ju looked at her, and suddenly leaned a little closer to her. He placed one hand on the side of her face and observed her sleeping face up close. The royal sister was getting more and more beautiful, Putting aside the fact that beauty was in the eye of the beholder, Gong Yimo was indeed getting more and more outstanding. Her face was as if it was delicately painted by a master painter. She was so beautiful that she did not look like a real person. However, as the saying goes, the appearance is born from the heart. The calmness between her eyebrows that seemed to be able to contain all things was something that no woman in this world could possess. The casual elegance of her movements was also built on her strong self-confidence. Just these 2 points alone made her unparalleled in the world. Looking at her like this, Gong Dai felt an inexplicable thirst. Ever since the last time, he did not dare to get too close to Gong Yimo. Because as soon as he got close to her, he felt something stirring in the depths of his heart, making him increasingly unable to control himself. However, she was so attractive to him that he could not help but move forward a little, and a little more. The bed under him was the same one he had laid on that day. On this bed, he fantasized about his royal sister doing that kind of thing. Just thinking about it made him feel even more thirsty. His body seemed to be desperately thirsting for something, but he suppressed it with all his might to not explode. Just a kiss. Just like how she kissed his forehead when she said goodnight when they were young. Just a kiss. Thinking of this, Gong Dai carefully lowered his body, held his breath, and gently kissed her forehead. That warm, jade-like touch made him feel blessed. His eyes unconsciously fell on her cherry lips. With a somewhat greedy gaze, he stared deeply. It should not be like this. Once the royal sister finds out, it will be over. Reason told him this and tried hard to wake him up. However, his eyes became more and more infatuated. That pair of jade-like eyes seemed to flash with a misty light, reflecting a blurry color. Gong Yimo's fair face seemed to be faintly glowing in this kind of night. Under those lightly trembling eyelashes, there was a little red that made him unable to tear his eyes away. Can't be like this. He was still her royal brother. She would not accept it. He had to endure until the time was right. Then, he would move her bit by bit. He panted slightly. Holding his breath for a long time made his jade face turn slightly red. His heart repeatedly told him to endure, but at this moment, Gong Yimo moved her arm slightly. The moment her collar opened, it was a beauty that he had never seen before. Gong Dai's breathing stagnated and his eyes darkened slightly. A gust of cold wind blew, causing the windows to rustle slightly. However, Gong Dai could not hear it at all. In this small space, it was so hot that it could make one go crazy. Endure. He could endure so many times, so why couldn't he endure now? But how long did he have to endure? Just this once, just this once. His heart warned himself again. However, his body had long been suppressed. Trembling, he lightly touched her lips. It was as if he had returned to that night in the desolate miasma plains. That familiar feeling of craziness instantly swallowed him. I want it so much. I want it so much. Why can't blood relatives do it? She was clearly the woman he loved the most. In his absent-mindedness, not only did he lick her lips, he even nibbled on her lips. That increasingly urgent action made Gong Yimo could not help but let out a moan. Once she let out a sound, Gong Dai, as if he had just woken up from a dream, quickly leaned back. He looked left and right. From the corner of his eyes, he saw that Gong Yimo did not move again. Only then did he dare to look at her. His heart was thumping like a thief. He was ready to leave, but he stood up, sat down, and stood up again. In the end, he did not understand how to suppress the unsatisfied feeling in his heart. His gaze, once again, fell on Gong Yimo's body. So this was his poison, and also the only antidote. Obviously, he knew that he should not, but his rationality had long disappeared. Once again, he eagerly sucked on Gong Yimo's lips. The beautiful touch there simply made him sigh in happiness. However, from the bottom of his heart, he suddenly revealed an infinite amount of bitterness. The sour and astringent feeling spread to his limbs and bones. He was screaming in his heart. When exactly would he be able to have her? When would he not have to sneak around like this, but kiss her openly, and she would also accept it with a smile? Why was it so difficult? Why did it have to be her younger brother? In the past, this was the greatest happiness in his life. He did not expect that one day, this would actually be his greatest pain. If it was not her younger brother, he would not have met her. If it was her younger brother, he could not have her, he could not accept it. If this was fate, he also wanted to go against the heavens and change his fate. Chapter 152. When Gong Dai left, it was already late into the night. The moment he closed the door, Gong Yimo couldn't hold it in any longer and suddenly opened her eyes. She could still feel the slight numbness on her lip. When he kissed her, she could also feel his joy and sweetness. Gong Yimo felt as though she had lost her soul and her brain couldn't even function. As she wasn't in a good mood, she didn't drink much and fell asleep. When Gong Dai bit her, she woke up, but because the scene was too awkward, she pretended to be asleep. As for Gong Dai, because he was flustered, he didn't realize that she had already woken up. She thought that her movement would definitely scare Gong Dai away, but she didn't expect that not only was he not scared, after a while, he still kissed her again and again, licked and kissed, lingered. That deep and sweet feeling between tossing and turning made her fluster. God knows how much effort she used to control her breathing so that it didn't change. Otherwise, if Gong Dai realized that she had woken up, she really didn't know how to face him. Gong Dai, why did he like her? For so many years, she had treated him as a brother, a friend, and even a child. But the only thing that she couldn't treat him as a lover was how old he was. He was only 13 years old. Such a young child, how could he have such thoughts? She thought of her past life, because Su Miaolan treated him well, so he was dead set on Su Miaolan. Then in this life, was it the same? Just because she treated him well, so he developed feelings for her. Actually, it was just a kind of attachment and gratitude, not love. It was just because he was young and couldn't differentiate. Oh right, she almost forgot. There was a period of time when a teenager would have a hazy good impression of the older woman beside him. This was a normal phenomenon. It was all her fault for not realizing it in time and correcting it in time. Now, it shouldn't be too late, right? At this moment, the sound of slapping on the window woke her up. It turned out that it was snowing. This winter night really made her feel extremely cold. Gong Yimo sat up and grabbed her blanket with both hands. She looked confused. She tried to recall what was strange about Gong Dai in the past. In the end, it was fine if she didn't pay attention. But now that she thought about it, there was something wrong everywhere. Gong Yimo scratched her head in annoyance. When did Gong Dai start to like her? She was so careless that she didn't realize it until now. So now, what was she going to do? Gong Yimo was deep in thought. Should she make things clear to Gong Dai and slowly guide him back to the right path, or should she run away from home and let Gong Dai calm down? Logic told her that the first option was more acceptable to teenagers, but she felt that she couldn't face Gong Dai and wanted to choose the second option. Just as she was lost in her thoughts, the snow outside the window gradually stopped. Specks of white fluttered down, and it started to snow. As Gong Yimo was highly skilled in martial arts, Gong Dai had never sent anyone to follow her out of fear that she would feel disgusted. However, he had still set up layers of defenses in the entire Qi manor. Recently, there had been many night patrols, especially recently. Basically, there would be such a scene every night. Just as Gong Yimo was feeling vexed, the sound of fighting could be heard from afar. It seemed that they were all here to find her. Recently, the Qi manor had become more and more restless. If this continued, Gong Dai wouldn't be able to hold on for much longer. She hugged her knees and waited quietly. However, unlike in the past, the battles were ended quickly. This time, the sounds of fighting did not subside for a long time. She understood that the other party was determined to find her. Since they dared to make such a big fuss, it was likely that they were certain that she was here. Gong Yimo thought for a moment and suddenly got up. Right now, everyone's attention was focused on that area. This was the time when the manor's defenses were at their weakest. She had the space and there was nothing to pack. After some thought, she left a note, hoping that Gong Dai would not be angry when he saw this note. Your Highness, don't worry. Although there are many people in this group, they are no match for us. There is still morning court tomorrow, so Your Highness should rest early. As Lo Chi spoke, Gong Dai, who was wearing a black robe, looked at the corpses being dragged away. A cold light flashed in his eyes. Have you found out who they are? Lo Chi asked in a low voice. Although they are well hidden, we can still tell that there are 3 groups of people. There are 2 from the palace and 1 more that we have not found yet. The unknown was the most annoying thing. Gong Dai's cold gaze fell on the few people who were still stubbornly resisting. To be able to cultivate such skilled death warriors, it seemed that the power behind them was not ordinary. Continue to investigate. As long as they move, there will be traces left behind. These words were taught to him by Gong Yimo. Yes. The sound of killing gradually stopped. Gong Dai rubbed his forehead tiredly and then went to rest. After entering the room, he casually called someone over. Xiao Qi, there was quite a commotion just now. Go and see if royal sister was awakened. Also, clean up the corpses. I don't want her to see any traces. Yes. After giving the order, Gong Dai once again lay on the bed. But this time, he did not lie down for long. Xiao Qi suddenly ran in a panic. His face was pale. How dare he do such a disgraceful thing? Gong Dai did not have time to care. Because of Xiao Qi's words, his mind went blank. After a long time, he found his voice. You said. Royal sister is missing. Gong Yimo braved the wind and snow alone in the suburbs. She did not have a specific direction. In fact, she did not know where she should go. She only knew that she should keep walking and not look back. She did not know if it was because it was too cold, but she felt that she could not think. Why did Gong Dai and Gong Che both like her? In her previous life, these 2 clearly hated her. In this life, she treated them as family. She treated them so well, she only wanted to hug their thighs and try her best to do some good. Why? Why did things become so complicated? Gong Yimo turned around and looked at the city walls that were faintly visible in the dark night. Since she could not figure it out and there was no place for her in the capital, then, she should just leave. Gong Dai clenched the letter in his hand. There was only 1 sentence on it. There are too many night watchers. There is no place for me in the capital. I am going to look for my master. Don't worry, wait for me to come back. The handwriting was flustered and messy. It could be seen that she had written it when she was extremely flustered. It was impossible for her to be so flustered because she suddenly wanted to look for some master. It was also impossible for her to be so flustered because she was afraid of implicating him after seeing people repeatedly finding fault with her. The only possibility was, she found out. She found out that her closest family member had fallen in love with her. She could not accept it, so she left. She will not come back. Looking at Gong Dai's pale face, Lo Qi did not dare to make a sound. It was Xiao Qi who could not help but whisper, Your Highness. The princess should not have gone far. Let's go after her. Go after her. It was easy to say. Gong Yimo was not a weak girl who could not even truss a chicken. Her qinggong was outstanding. If she wanted to avoid them, it would be like looking for a needle in a haystack. Seeing that Gong Dai did not speak, Lo Qi looked at him who seemed to have lost his soul and could not help but say. Since the princess said she will come back, she will definitely come back. Your Highness need not be too worried, she won't come back. Gong Ju's lips suddenly lost their color. His eyes were empty as he stared into the distance. She won't come back, Lo Qi sighed. Just as he was about to say something, Gong Dai clutched his chest and spat out a mouthful of blood. She will not come back, Your Highness. Luo Qi was shocked and hurriedly supported Gong Ju. Gong Ju's eyes were blank, and his lips and teeth were dyed red. He could only repeat over and over again, I won't come back. Your Highness, don't worry. We will definitely find the princess and bring her back. His words caused Gong Ju to finally look at him. Blood was dripping from the corners of his mouth, and his face was pale and frightening, but he did not care. He only held on to Lo Qi and even smiled. Help me find her. Then help me ask her, why are you so cruel, Your Highness? Chapter 153. Gong Yimo's heart suddenly felt uneasy. She didn't know where this uneasiness came from and only felt flustered as she couldn't sort out her thoughts. But what she was doing wasn't wrong, right? Perhaps after coming here for a period of time, Gong Dai would realize that his way of thinking was wrong. Then when she returned, wouldn't everyone be happy? Just as she was immersed in her thoughts, a murderous intent suddenly appeared. She subconsciously dodged, and 3 hidden weapons hit the rock, creating sparks. "Who's there?" Gong Yimo turned around and realized that while she was deep in thought, she had already been surrounded. At this moment, a feminine voice was heard. "It's not in vain that we have braved the wind and snow to wait here for half a month. The situation in the capital is so tense, but Princess is still able to maintain her composure and wait for so long. It's really admirable." Gong Yimo looked at them and gave a cold laugh. "You're all waiting for me because of the bomb in my hands. Since you know the power of it and still dare to force me, aren't you afraid?" That masked black-robed man smiled and his feminine voice had a hint of seductiveness, as if he was throwing her a coquettish glance. "If Princess wants to make a move, we're naturally afraid. But now that we're so close to each other, unless Princess wants to perish together, otherwise, we can only have a real fight. I'm sure Princess is of noble birth and wouldn't want to fight to the death with our worthless lives, right?" Gong Yimo's heart sank. These were all men of sacrifice, so naturally they weren't afraid of death. But she couldn't die here. If she couldn't use the bomb, the other party had too many people and she might not be their match. "Ask the person in charge to come out and talk." That feminine man raised his eyebrows and smiled. "Everyone says Princess is exceptionally intelligent and it's indeed a well-deserved reputation. Young Master Li, since Princess wants to see you, you don't have to hide anymore." "Young Master Li?" Gong Yimo narrowed her eyes. She finally knew who had come. It was indeed Li Ku. He walked out of the crowd and tore off the black veil covering his face. After not seeing him for a while, he had lost a lot of weight and his eyes had become gloomy. He no longer had the gentleness and elegance that he had in the past, nor was he in high spirits when he talked about his ideals. It could be seen that after betraying her, he had not been living well. Seeing that it was him, Gong Yimo suddenly deflated and shrugged. "I've underestimated this woman, Long Xiangxiang. She actually sent so many people to guard this place for so long. I can go with you, but you have to promise me one thing." "What conditions?" Li Ku's voice was like sandpaper. It sounded very strange. He stared at Gong Yimo as if he wanted to see through her thoughts. Gong Yimo smiled. "It's simple. You can retreat 1 mile. Of course, you can block all my exits. I just want a quiet space to have a good chat with this Mr. Li." The feminine man smiled. "Princess, you're making things difficult for us. You're such a smart person, we don't dare to let you out of our sight." At this moment, Li Ku suddenly said, "I can agree to it." He took out a pill. "This is muscle weakening powder. As long as you're willing to take it, I'll let them leave." His words made the feminine man a little unhappy. After all, it was too dangerous. They were just following orders and could not go against their leader's decision. However, after thinking about it, if Gong Yimo really took the muscle weakening powder, there was nothing to be afraid of, so he did not say anything more. Gong Yimo was slightly stunned. Li Ku took a step forward and said, "Are you going to take it or not?" Gong Yimo could not avoid Li Ku's intense stare. In the end, she smiled helplessly. "I'll take it." Seeing that she really took it, the feminine man narrowed his eyes. He wanted to go back on his words but was stopped by Li Ku. "Jianxi, don't forget who's the one in charge. And you're just a sacrificial soldier." Jianxi narrowed his gloomy eyes and looked at the indifferent Gong Yimo. He said coldly, "Do you know that if there's a what if, you won't be able to get away with it?" Li Ku smiled coldly. "So, there's no what if." Since he had said so, no matter how unwilling Jianxi was, he could only obey. With the order, everyone ran in 8 directions, leaving them a secluded place. The snowflakes swirled in the air, making the place even quieter. Gong Yimo sighed. "Li Ku, aren't you afraid?" With a flip of her hand, a pill appeared in her hand. When she took the pill, she had actually thrown it into her space. Now, she took it out again. Li Ku's eyes narrowed slightly, then he smiled palely. "Whatever. Whether you take it or not, there's so many of us. You can't escape." Gong Yimo laughed. "There are quite a lot of people, but aren't they scattered now?" She swept her gaze over Li Ku, and unexpectedly, there was some coldness in her eyes. "You'd better not make a sound, because I can definitely kill you before you can give a warning." She thought that Li Ku would be afraid when she said that, but she did not expect Li Ku to stand there quietly. When he heard what she said, he sighed slightly and seemed to relax. He finally smiled. This smile finally had a shadow of his old self. It was gentle and elegant, with a hint of ambition and caution. Whatever. Anyway, I've been waiting for this day for a long time. Gong Yimo raised her eyebrows curiously, but she heard him continue. Do you know what kind of life I'm living now? Gong Yimo said lightly, aren't you the one who outshines others and has power and wealth in your hands? She always remembered that Li Ku had an older brother. He always wanted to surpass his older brother, but his family was strict. His father was afraid that the two sons would fight, so he had always supported his eldest son. Li Ku smiled weakly. The snowflakes fell on his face, but they did not melt. It was as if his heart had long been in a cold hell. Since young, I've always been more outstanding than my brother, and we're both legitimate sons, but because he has the word eldest, my father has always supported him step by step, hoping that he would be able to support the family in the future and bring glory to the family. Page. With that idiot. He did not know martial arts and was wearing thin clothes in this weather. His voice was trembling, but it was not clear whether it was because of the cold or because of anger. And I'm ambitious and outstanding. He didn't support me, so I relied on myself. In the end, I became a scholar at the age of 11, until I was selected as the second in the imperial examinations. It took me 7 years to enter the Hanlin Academy, but I put in so much effort, studying day and night to become an editor, but I'm only a 7th rank official. And my brother, who is not very capable, became a 5th rank official because of my father's support. Why? We're both sons, but why is he so biased? I'm obviously ambitious, I'm obviously quick-witted. If I could exchange with him, I would definitely be able to make a name for myself and make a fortune, until I met you. Chapter 154. His sharp eyes landed on Gong Yimo. They were gloomy and ambitious. I saw with my own eyes how much the Emperor dotes on you. Moreover, you're such an outstanding person. It's impossible for you to lie low. At that time, I thought that you were my chance. So I approached you and followed you. What's the point of being a 7th ranked official? I believed that you wouldn't push your own brother into the fire pit. So I followed you to build the canal. I waited for the day when you would strike back. His eyes flashed with a strange light. His voice was dreamy. I didn't expect that I would really succeed. And I didn't have to wait for a few years. I could soar to the sky in one day. Gong Yimo lowered her eyes. She didn't know why, but she didn't really like him. I succeeded. He said in a dreamy tone. Imperial concubine Long did as she said and gave me a high position. I can trample my brother under my feet and let my father see who is worthy of his cultivation and who is. But he smiled bitterly. When he looked at Gong Yimo again, there was no passion in his eyes. There was only bitterness. But the result was different from what I expected. The cold wind swept up the snowflakes and whistled through the air. The two were clearly only 2 or 3 meters apart, but this distance was like a chasm that was difficult to cross. Gong Yimo could only look on coldly. Father ignored me. He said. He was very disappointed in me. He also said that what he was most afraid of was brothers fighting. I didn't expect that in the end, it was still brothers fighting. He smiled bitterly. His face became paler. His Majesty doesn't like me. Clearly, when he first received the news of Lei Feng, he was so enthusiastic. But ever since you faked your death, he always looks at me with a cold gaze. Clearly, I'm also talented. I'm someone who really wants to make a name for myself. The Emperor's attitude determines the attitude of his colleagues. Intentionally or unintentionally, they ostracized me, causing me to gradually be isolated. Many of my former friends have cut ties with me, leaving me completely alone. As for the Crown Prince, he sees me as a thorn in his side. There have been a few times when I couldn't get up. He shook his head. That's not the most important thing. The most important thing is, Ninth Highness, he's really something. He's only been in the capital for a few days, but he's already done everything he can. Today, Imperial concubine Long told me that Gong Dai wants to attack me, but she can't find out why. She said, only by finding you and threatening him can I live. As his last word fell, Gong Yimo only felt that everything was silent. Only the sound of snowflakes falling could be heard, landing on her hair and clothes, making her look so thin. She was so indifferent that Li Ku wondered what exactly he wanted from her. He wanted to make a name for himself, but was abandoned by his family and friends. He wanted to make a name for himself, but was ostracized by everyone. Now, in order to save his life, he had to rely on the girl in front of him. The life he imagined was not like this. You can't kill me, nor can you catch me. If those people hadn't left before, it might be possible. But now, her only problem was whether she should kill this person in front of her. Li Ku smiled faintly. He was not bad looking. His smile was like the blooming of snowflakes, but there was an indescribable sadness. I also don't want to kill you. After saying that, he lifted his clothes and knelt in front of Gong Yimo. His action shocked Gong Yimo. She narrowed her eyes slightly. What are you doing? Li Ku raised his head. There was no fear in his eyes. Instead, there was a sense of relief. Nothing. I was just thinking that instead of dying in Gong Dai's hands, I'd rather die in your hands. This kind of life. I don't want to live anymore. After saying that, he lowered his head and laughed. Perhaps from the moment I chose to betray you, I was wrong. But I won't admit it. Yes, I'm not wrong. The reason why I'm kneeling here today is because I was wrong by one move. You were my sincere friend at that time. Dying in your hands is not unjust. But what betrayal? If I had to do it again, I would still do it. So, I'm not wrong. The only mistake is, Father didn't know how to judge people clearly and didn't know how to be flexible. The mistake is that the Emperor was biased, leaving me with nothing to show for my talent. The one who's wrong is everyone else. I'm not wrong. After saying that, he suddenly laughed out loud as if he was relieved. After laughing, Po looked at her coldly and said, "Don't worry. But it doesn't matter. Winner takes all, I admit it." After saying that, he used his hand to make a slit on his neck. His eyes were filled with eagerness. "Come, use your hidden sword and slit my throat. I hope you can be more ruthless and don't make me feel too much pain." However, the strange thing was that after waiting for a long time, Gong Yimo didn't move. She only looked at him thoughtfully. "Do you know the feeling of having your throat slit?" Gong Yimo suddenly asked. Li Ku was a little confused and looked straight at her. He looked like he was in a daze, which made Gong Yimo laugh. Then, she touched her neck as if she was recalling something and muttered, "After having your throat slit by a sword, if it's deeper, you might die immediately. But if the person using the sword is more ruthless and slit your throat a little shallower, then you will feel suffocated. Then, it will be extremely uncomfortable. It's very painful to wait for your blood to run out and die." Her words were cold, as if she had experienced it before. Li Ku felt an inexplicable sense of panic, but he forced a smile and looked up at her. "So, you want me to bleed to death?" Unexpectedly, Gong Yimo blinked and finally laughed and shook her head. "You said that you got close to me with a motive, but I believe that later on, you also had a moment of sincerity towards me, Shu Yuan, Ziqing and the others. But, you betrayed me. Actually, betraying me is not the most serious thing. What I am angry about is that you are full of talent, but you used it all on fighting for power. Even when I knelt down and begged you to keep it a secret, you were blinded by ambition and didn't think about the consequences. This is what you meant by having great ambition? For the country and the people? Isn't that too narrow-minded?" Gong Yimo's words were like steel needles. Every word made Li Ku's face turn paler and paler. He knelt on the ground, but he knelt upright. His eyes looked stubbornly at Gong Yimo. "What do you know? Do you understand my pain? I am full of passion, full of pride. Yet all of you want me to be an editor whose words carry little weight. That's not the life I want. Only the higher my status, the more people will listen to me and value me. Only then can I do more for the country and the people. So, I climbed up regardless of everything, for the sake of being able to lift heavy weights easily, for the sake of serving the country, for the sake of leaving my name in history. I am not wrong. But so what if you are sitting in a high position? Aren't you now begging for death because you are being ostracized by others?" Chapter 155. Gong Yimo's sarcastic remark made Li Ku's face turn red. I didn't. It's all of you. You didn't give me a way out. Since that's the case, isn't it death? A man is born magnanimous and does not fear death. It's just a head, just take it. Then why did you ask me to kill you? Gong Yimo casually exposed his pretense. Looking at his pale face, she smiled coldly. If he did not regret it, he would not be kneeling here and begging for her punishment. Maybe you're not wrong and you don't regret it. Gong Yimo was a little tired. Her soft voice sounded like a sigh. But I've decided to forgive you. You. Li Ku lifted his head to look at her. The muscles on his face were trembling. Was Gong Yimo pitying him? Was she giving him charity? Unexpectedly, when he lifted his head, he met Gong Yimo's cold eyes. That pair of eyes seemed to be able to contain everything, but at the same time, it was also empty, dangerous, and deep. Didn't you say that you'll do better than your brother when you're in a high position? That you'll do more good deeds for the country and the people and leave your name in history? I'll wait. After saying that, she turned to leave. Li Ku came back to his senses and shouted angrily, Gong Yimo, you'll die in my hands one day if you continue to be so soft-hearted. Gong Yimo did not stop. With her back facing him, she waved her hand nonchalantly. Whatever. You'd better think about how to survive first. That tone of hers was really nonchalant. Li Ku clenched his fist tightly. He buried his head deeply. He should have felt humiliated, but he didn't know why. But when Gong Yimo uttered the words forgive you, he felt his body and mind relax. So, deep in his heart, he had wanted to use death to exchange for her forgiveness. If he had denied himself, then what had he gained after all this time? Hearing the sound of weapons clashing from afar, he suddenly let out a muffled laugh. Finally, he took out a dagger and stabbed it into his body. Before he fainted, he was still thinking that if he died, then in this short life of his, the one thing he would not regret the most, would probably be meeting her. Gong Yimo, I have already betrayed my beliefs. As for you, since you have chosen to persevere, then please persevere, all the way west. Originally, Gong Yimo wanted to look for her master, but after thinking about it, she felt that she was just a stranger to him, so it was better not to disturb him. Thus, she wandered aimlessly. A few days later, she arrived at a town, Gui City. This place was still at the foot of the emperor, so the trade was very prosperous. Gong Yimo changed into men's clothes and sat at a small stall to eat. She was not used to being alone. She buried her head in her food, but heard the discussion from the neighboring seats. Have you heard? The 9th prince who made great contributions in the West continent is critically ill. How could that be? I've seen him from afar before. He looks like a spirited young man. Isn't that right? Gong Yimo thought that she had heard wrongly. She hurriedly walked up and grabbed that person to ask, what did you just say? Who are you saying is critically ill? Gong Yimo glared at that person, her eyes sharp and murderous. He was so frightened that his legs turned to jelly. He hurriedly said, Sir, I'm not spouting nonsense. It's true. 9th prince is vomiting blood non-stop. The imperial physicians are helpless and are looking for famous physicians. Vomiting blood. Gong Yimo loosened her grip and that person hurriedly ran away. She was still in a daze. Gong Dai vomiting blood. It couldn't be, because of her, right? Her little face was pale and her heart was in turmoil. She hesitated over this thought. What should she do? Should she go back? But if she went back, what if Gong Dai was lying to her? But if she didn't go back, what if it was true? Gong Dai. That was the person she cherished in the palm of her hands. On the other hand, Chi Mana was filled with gloom. Gong Dai was lying on the bed with a pale face. However, there weren't any imperial physicians around. Lo Chi carefully walked in and knelt by the bed as he whispered. The news has already spread and His Majesty's notice has already been posted in Xiong City. Princess has only left for a few days so she will definitely see it. As for Gong Dai, he seemed to have fallen asleep. After hearing his words, he didn't move at all. Lo Chi sighed inwardly and continued, Our men have been searching from the 4 city gates but have yet to find any trace of Princess. After saying that, he originally thought that Gong Dai would be angry. Who knew that he actually closed his eyes and deeply furrowed his brows. It was as if he was having a nightmare. After a while, Gong Dai suddenly groaned in pain and slowly opened his eyes. His eyes were different from the usual black and white coldness. At this moment, his eyes were blurred, as if he was still in a dream and unable to extricate himself. After a while, his gaze slowly turned cold and finally turned into a deathly stillness. "Tonight, have everyone leave the manor." Lo Chi raised his head in confusion but heard Gong Dai continue. "Also, have everyone outside return." Why? This time, Lo Chi was really shocked. No one knew better than him how important the princess was to His Highness. Why would His Highness make such a decision? As for Gong Dai, he only slowly placed his hand over his heart and closed his eyes. "I can feel it. Royal sister, she has returned." After Gong Yimo sneaked through the city gates, she didn't directly head to Qi Manor. Soon, the sky would turn dark and she would go and investigate when the time came. In the end, she wasn't prepared to meet Gong Dai. She only wanted to see how Gong Dai was doing. If it really was an emergency, she couldn't care about anything else. However, if Gong Dai was lying to her, what should she do? In the tavern, she had downed jug after jug of wine. Everyone said that wine boosts courage. She never thought that there would be a day when she would have to use wine to boost her courage. Night quickly arrived. Gong Yimo secretly approached Qi Manor and stopped to listen. During the day, she had heard that Qi Manor had sent out all of its men and that it was now an empty manor. She didn't believe it, but after listening, she really felt that it was very quiet, as if there wasn't a single person inside. This made Gong Yimo a little angry. Even if they were in a hurry to find someone, they shouldn't disregard their own safety like this. Recently, there had been quite a number of people spying on the manor. She shook her head disapprovingly, then flipped over the wall and landed steadily on the grass. At this moment, there was still a layer of frost on the grass. When she stepped on it, there was a light crisp sound. Gong Yimo held her breath and waited for a long time. When she found that there was indeed no one, she hurriedly ran towards Gong Dai's residence. The manor was really quiet. The ambush that she had thought would happen was completely gone. Gong Yimo's heart trembled. Could it be that something had really happened to Gong Dai? With this thought, she ran even more hurriedly. Chapter 156. When she walked to Gong Dai's door, she still felt that it was a little unreal. Yesterday, she was still thinking that it would be best if they could meet again after a few years. Today, she ran back eagerly. When her hand touched the carved wooden door, she could barely hear any sound from inside. Gong Dai. Was he still inside? If he was inside and sick, why wasn't there anyone guarding the door? If he wasn't inside, where did he go? The door was gently opened. To prevent the cold wind from blowing in, she quickly closed the door. Her heart was pounding. There was only a dim yellow light in the room, blurring her vision for a moment. Seeing that there was no one in the living room, she suppressed her breathing and walked into the room. The faint smell of medicine lifted her spirits and she quickly walked to the bedside. The moment she saw Gong Dai, Gong Yimo covered her mouth with one hand to suppress the sound that was about to come out. Gong Ju. His ink-black hair was spread out on the snow-white couch. His delicate eyebrows and eyes were tightly closed. Under his straight nose, his lips were bloodless. His whole person seemed to have lost his spirit. It was as if he was a porcelain doll lying there. Standing so close to him, Gong Yimo couldn't hear a trace of his breath. She was a little anxious and took a few steps forward. Gong Dai. Gong Yimo's heart trembled. She stretched out her hand, but she didn't dare to touch him. Gong Dai, Gong Dai? She gently sat beside Gong Dai, as if she was afraid of disturbing him. Seeing him like this, Gong Yimo understood that he was really vomiting blood. Because she had experienced it before, it was as if her spirit had been sucked out in an instant, and she was as good as dead. The only difference was that time, she was so angry that she vomited blood, but Gong Dai. It was because of her. Gong Yimo felt very guilty and regretted her action of leaving. She finally reached out to touch his brows and sighed. This pair of eyes looks better when they are open. When she closed her eyes, she was beautiful, but she was so fragile that it made one's heart ache. Who knew that as soon as her voice fell, Gong Dai's hand would grab her and he would open his eyes. That pair of black jade-like eyes looked deeply into her eyes, as if he wanted to completely imprint her in the depths of his mind. "If I open my eyes, will you still leave?" His voice was hoarse as if he hadn't spoken for a long time. Under the dim light, he pursed his lips and stared at her, waiting for her answer. Gong Yimo opened her mouth, but before she could say anything, she was pulled into Gong Dai's embrace. "Royal sister, stay by my side." Gong Yimo's chin rested on Gong Dai's shoulder. She could feel his body trembling slightly because of the tension. That kind of eagerness and joy, mixed with sorrow, she could actually feel it all. She was a little flustered. The young man's body seemed to have recovered and was getting hotter and hotter. She was also being hugged tighter and tighter. "If possible, I really want to fuse you into a part of me, never to be separated again." His low sigh woke Gong Yimo up from her dream. She gently pushed Gong Dai, but he didn't move at all. Afraid of hurting and agitating him, Gong Yimo tried her best to ask in the softest voice possible. "You really like me?" Perhaps she would run away, but when it came to facing it, she wasn't one to shrink back. If there was, since it was already in front of her, then she would say it clearly. Gong Dai's response was only a passionate kiss. He trembled slightly and pressed his lips against her neck. His extremely hot breath blew over, making Gong Yimo feel half of her body go numb. She didn't dare to move in his embrace. Her heart was also beating very fast. Feeling her nervousness, Gong Dai smiled deeply and whispered into her ear. "Since I was 9 years old, I have fallen in love with you, my royal sister." His words shocked Gong Yimo. Then, her scalp went numb and she was stunned on the spot. For a moment, she didn't know what to do. Gong Dai didn't care. He was hugging her like this and whispering sweet nothings into her ear. This was something he didn't even dare to think about before. At this moment, he suddenly felt a little lucky. He was lucky that Gong Yimo had finally discovered his feelings. Now, he didn't have to hide anymore. He could show it all without any scruples. With that thought, he hugged Gong Yimo even tighter and breathed in her scent as if he was breathing in oxygen. Gong Yimo didn't know what to say anymore. 9 years old. Would a 9-year-old child know what love was? So, she wasn't wrong. Gong Dai's feelings for her were just attachment and gratitude. He had misunderstood this feeling and caused it to go down the wrong path, resulting in this scene. She opened her mouth and wanted to say that it was wrong of him to do this. However, Gong Dai was so weak right now that she didn't know what to say. Her long silence made Gong Dai a little uneasy. He tried to lick Gong Yimo's earlobe but found that she didn't resist. That kind of happiness was simply unreal. "Royal sister." He sighed softly. "I know it's hard for you to accept, but it's okay. I can wait. As long as you're within my reach, I can always wait for you." He closed his eyes and gently rubbed her hair. His cold eyes were filled with love and sweetness. "If you feel that it's difficult, I can endure it. I can still be your brother, your family. As long as I'm the most important person to you, I can live with any identity. I can also become whatever you like. Anything is fine." He was such a noble young man, yet he could compromise to such an extent. It was really unbearable to hurt him. Gong Yimo couldn't help but think, in her previous life, was he also so deeply in love with Su Miaolan? Later on, he personally sent Su Miaolan to Gong Che's bed. She didn't know what kind of heartache he went through. Perhaps. Gong Dai had always been a person who knew how to fulfill someone's wish. He was cold to others, but to those who were good to him, he was unbelievably gentle. Moreover, to be able to give up so much, he had already far surpassed her in her previous life. However, she was destined to let him down. Gong Yimo couldn't imagine that she would fall in love with someone younger than her. Moreover, this person was raised by her. She watched him grow up from his thin and weak appearance. This kinship was the most precious thing to her. She didn't want this relationship to become complicated, so she calmed her heart and said in a low voice, "You're my brother." Her words made Gong Dai's body suddenly stiffen, but she still continued. "You're also the most important person to me. In this life, I won't get married, nor will I fall in love, nor will I talk about this kind of relationship. If you're willing to take back the idea of liking me, I'll never leave you." Gong Dai suddenly and slowly let go of her, looking straight into her eyes. The gentleness and happiness disappeared in an instant. At this moment, he looked at her with a heavy gaze, which actually made Gong Yimo feel a chill run down her spine. Be your brother for life. Chapter 157. No emotion could be heard from his low voice, but his heart was being torn apart. He tried his best to control himself, telling himself to calm down. What she meant was that he had to let go of this relationship. Not only that, he would never be able to hug her or kiss her openly for the rest of his life. What she meant was that he was the most important person to her in this life. She would never leave him, but that was where she was for the rest of her life. He would never be her lover. Gong Dai's hands relaxed and tightened. Even Gong Yimo could feel his forbearance, but she did not dare to say anything. She was waiting for his answer. His rationality told him to say yes. Wasn't it just holding back his feelings? Wasn't it just pretending that he did not love her? So many years had passed. He could do it. She would never marry and accompany him for the rest of her life. Wasn't that enough? But his feelings were screaming. They were screaming. They were rolling and wanting to tear everything apart. He was unwilling. He did not want to be the person closest to her. He wanted more. He wanted her to love him. He wanted her to kiss him. He wanted to be her real man. He longed for it so much that his heart was breaking. He had already endured so many nights of tossing and turning. Was he going to continue enduring? How long was he going to endure? Gong Ju's eyes alternated between forbearance and fear. She couldn't imagine how terrible Gong Ju's thoughts were at this moment. If she knew, she would have fled immediately. After a long time, just when Gong Yimo thought that he would not answer, Gong Dai laughed. It was a bitter laugh. His voice was heavy, as if he could not breathe. Okay. I promise you. Gong Yimo blinked. Including letting go of this relationship. Her words were like a steel knife, stabbing him so hard that his heart was bleeding. However, he still wanted to smile. He smiled as he spoke slowly, one word at a time. Yes, including letting go of this relationship. Letting go? No, he would never let go. Even if the world was destroyed, even if the world could not tolerate him, he would die. He would never let go. Gong Dai felt that his smiling face was almost stiff, but his heart was numb from the pain. Otherwise, how could he say these words so calmly? However, Gong Yimo was still worried. She hesitated and asked, "Then we'll still be siblings in the future?" A fishy and sweet taste filled his mouth, but Gong Dai resisted it with all his might. He laughed again. "Yeah, we'll still be siblings in the future." These few words were like death by 1,000 cuts, but he still said it so casually. He never lied to her, so Gong Yimo was satisfied. Originally, she wanted to give him a hug to reach a consensus, but when she thought that it was a sensitive time, she gave up. In addition, she began a deep self-reflection. In the past, she always felt that she was young and others were young, so there were many things that she did not care about. Now that she was 14, although in her opinion, this was still the age to act coquettishly, she forgot that in another year, she would be considered an adult in the ancient times. She would be a big girl. It would be better to have less physical contact in the future. Therefore, she retracted her outstretched hand and pretended to stretch. She forced herself to be normal and asked in a lazy manner, "Then, do you feel better now?" Psychological problems needed to be treated. As long as she could talk it through and slowly recuperate, she should be fine. Gong Dai smiled palely. His black hair set off his devilish facial features. Under the dim and flickering candlelight, there was a dangerous kind of beauty. "I'm much better." Hearing him say this, Gong Yimo nodded worriedly. "Have a good rest. In the future, I won't be so rash anymore. I'll tell you wherever I go." "I'm sorry." Gong Dai suddenly reached out and touched Gong Yimo's hair when she was unprepared. "It's okay. It was just that." He would never let her have the chance to leave his side again. Never again. "Oh right, why aren't Lo Chi and the rest with you?" Gong Yimo had wanted to ask this question for a long time. If they weren't around, what would happen if someone came at night? Gong Dai said, "I asked them to look for you." They'll be back tomorrow. If I didn't send them away, why would you come back so obediently? Gong Yimo showed a disapproving look. Then how can you guarantee your safety tonight? Gong Ju smiled, then suddenly leaned over and snuggled up to her legs, sighing faintly. He sighed and said, my safety can only depend on royal sister. His action shocked Gong Yimo. She quickly backed away and almost tripped Gong Dai. Gong Dai slowly straightened his body and sat on the bed. He said in a self-deprecating tone, why? As your younger brother, I can't even touch you? His gaze was too scary. The feeling that sent chills down one's spine appeared again. Gong Yimo's heart was pounding. She forced herself to calm down and then forced a smile. No. I just suddenly remembered that if I have to watch over you tonight, I have to bring my blanket over. I can recognize the bed, but you didn't seem to be in low spirits after leaving for a few days. Gong Dai didn't expose her. Gong Yimo secretly heaved a sigh of relief and ran out of the room. After she left, a stream of blood slowly flowed out from the corner of Gong Dai's mouth. He reached out to wipe it, but the more he wiped, the more blood there was. Looking at the blood-stained bedsheet, he smiled. However, his heart felt like it was being cut by a blunt instrument. Every inch it went in, it was doubly painful. He didn't want to experience this kind of pain anymore. A thought formed in his mind. He secretly circulated his qi. Since he was already injured internally, the moment he circulated his qi, he spat out a mouthful of blood. His face was as white as a sheet. When Gong Yimo came in with the blanket and saw the blood-stained bed, she couldn't care about anything else. Gong Dai. She flew forward and held his hand that was hanging down. Their fingers interlocked, and her inner energy was freely transferred into his body. After a long time, Gong Dai's face looked a little better. It wasn't like before, when it was full of death. Gong Yimo finally smiled. At this time, she saw that Gong Dai had finally recovered. Her heart that was pounding because of fear also gradually calmed down. Tomorrow, she would invite the best doctor to treat Gong Dai's body. With this thought, she was extremely tired. She didn't care about the blood-stained bed and the unconscious Gong Dai. She directly lay down beside him and fell asleep. In her sleep, she felt Gong Dai's body temperature was cold. She even subconsciously hugged him so that he could feel the warmth. Just like that, the night passed. The next day, when Gong Yimo woke up, the sky was already bright. She opened her eyes in a daze. She thought of something and hurriedly looked at Gong Dai's condition. Who knew that when she turned around, she would bump into Gong Dai's arms, which made her slightly stunned. But while she was still in a daze, Gong Ju lowered his head and gently kissed her on the lips, gently whispering to her, "Good morning, Momo." Chapter 158. Gong Yimo was stunned. The youth lying beside her with his chest exposed was Gong Dai, right? But why did he kiss her? Furthermore, why did he call her Momo? Gong Yimo's brain crashed. Did he forget what he said last night? Just as she was about to get up, she realized that her body had become very soft. This feeling was very similar to the exhaustion of inner strength, but it was more like poison. Gong Yimo's eyes immediately turned sharp as she looked at Gong Dai in disbelief. "You! What did you do to me?" Gong Dai was wearing a white robe as he lay beside her and played with her hair. Even the bedsheets had been changed at some point in time. The white and black contrasted with his pair of black jade eyes which had a soul-stirring beauty. As if he didn't find it seductive enough, he smiled faintly. "It's just a temporary cultivation dispersing pill. In 7 days, Royal Sister's inner strength will be restored." His words were gentle, but the meaning behind them caused Gong Yimo's eyes to widen. She thought of something and couldn't help but shrink back. Behind her was the wall and she couldn't even escape. Gong Dai saw her retreat and narrowed his eyes slightly, allowing her hair to fall from his hand. Finally, he revealed a tolerant smile. "Momo, where do you think you're going?" Gong Yimo looked at him in horror. Being called so intimately by a youth who was younger than her and whom she had watched grow up made her scalp tingle. "Gong Dai, I'm your elder sister, not Momo." Her slightly cold attitude made Gong Dai a little unhappy. He moved closer to her and in the narrow bed, She was forced into a corner. Gong Dai saw that her body was becoming more and more tense and said with some amusement, "Your royal sister, but you're also my Momo, Gong Dai." Her sudden stern attitude made Gong Dai's smile gradually fade. Gong Yimo was a little angry. "Why did you feed me the cultivation dispersing pill? Why did you kiss me? Have you forgotten what you said last night?" Gong Dai raised his eyebrows slightly. "What did I say last night?" His rhetorical question made Gong Yimo so angry that her face turned red. "You said that you would let go of this relationship that the world couldn't tolerate. You also said that you wanted to be my brother for the rest of our lives." Her words made Gong Dai's expression suddenly turn cold, as if a storm was brewing in his eyes. He was only a teenager, but for some reason, he made Gong Yimo feel pressured. He suddenly moved closer to Gong Yimo. As he moved closer, the layers of cold air made the hairs on her body stand up. "Then I'll answer you again." As he spoke, he placed one hand on the wall behind her, trapping her in his embrace. A dangerous feeling lingered in this space. "You want me to put you down?" He chuckled in a low voice. "What should I do? I can't do it. Whenever I see you close to other men, I'm so jealous that I want to go crazy. Whenever I see you, I can't control myself. If you want me to put you down, I'll have to die." He spoke faster and faster. "As for brother and sister..." Gong Dai lowered his head and looked deeply at her. His expression was firm and passionate. "If you care about blood relations, it's fine. We cannot have children. I can take contraceptive drugs. I won't let you get hurt. We can be together." This thought made him suddenly smile, and his eyes lit up. "Yes, that's right, royal sister. No, Momo, I don't want to be your brother. I can also be your man. How dare you?" Seeing that he was so happy that he suddenly suppressed the urge to kiss her, Gong Yimo could no longer maintain her calm and shouted loudly to stop him. Gong Dai was stunned by her shout, but she was trembling slightly under his body. What exactly went wrong? Gong Dai was a person who respected his loved ones the most. In her previous life, she could tell that he was with Su Miaolan. Even if he liked her, he wouldn't force her. So what was going on now? Gong Yimo couldn't understand. She looked at him in panic and murmured, "It shouldn't be like this, Gong Dai. I know you. You look cold, but your heart is soft. You definitely won't hurt me, right?" She could only gamble. She believed that in her previous life, Gong Dai could fulfill Su Miaolan's wish. In this life, he definitely wouldn't force her. When Gong Dai heard this, his body sank bit by bit. In the end, Gong Yimo could clearly feel his passion and forbearance. "But I have no other choice. I can only get you and become your man first. Then, you'll have to have me, right?" Gong Dai's eyes were slightly dazed. It was as if he was imagining the sweet scene when she had to have him. Finally, he couldn't help but lower his head and lightly plant a kiss on her forehead. The corner of his mouth slightly raised, filled with love and happiness. Gong Yimo's last line of defense in her heart collapsed the moment he kissed her. She gently bit her lower lip. You can't do this to me." As she spoke, she used her hand to push Gong Dai. However, this action only caused the loosely tied inner garment on his body to slip even more. He didn't move an inch. His smooth and powerful shoulders and exquisite collarbone combined to form an alluring picture. His eyes were smiling as he looked at her. That face of his seemed to be glowing, which made his already enchanting appearance make one's heart skip a beat when he smiled. Gong Yimo's brain could no longer function, but she also knew that this couldn't go on. She slightly swallowed her saliva. Before Gong Dai lowered his head and kissed her lips again, she closed her eyes and screamed. "You can't do this to me. Because I already have someone I like." Her words indeed made Gong Dai stop. However, in the next moment, she felt that the surrounding air seemed to have solidified. It made her unable to breathe. Before she could react to what was happening, her chin was tightly gripped by Gong Dai. He forced her to look into those extremely terrifying eyes. This one look made Gong Yimo's heart skip a beat. "Who is it?" These two words seemed to have been squeezed out from the gaps between his teeth. He stared at Gong Yimo. That pair of black jade-like eyes were quickly filled with blood vessels. From this, It could be seen that he was suppressing a lot of anger to say those 2 words. Gong Yimo was hurt by his grip. Being so close to his anger, that gaze that was almost burning her, and that almost tangible coldness mixed together to form a monstrous wave. This small space seemed to be about to be destroyed, which made her shocked and scared. Gong Yimo grabbed the bedsheets below her and looked at him in fear. This feeling, compared to her previous life when Gong Dai broke her fingers one by one, made her even more scared. It shouldn't be like this. Gong Yimo had long lost her ability to think. Clearly, in her previous life, he liked Su Miaolan, but was willing to fulfill her wish. Why couldn't it happen to her? Gong Yimo forced herself to calm down. She believed that Gong Dai wouldn't change, so she took a gamble. She said each word clearly. I already have someone I like. If you really like me, you have to respect me. Chapter 159. Before she could finish her sentence, she heard a loud noise. The 4 legs of the bed they were on suddenly broke. The entire bed sank, causing her to cry out in alarm. But this was not the end. Gong Dai forcefully lifted her chin. Gong Yimo could feel the murderous desire in his body. That murderous intent was so strong that it made his inner strength uncontrollable, causing his black hair to flutter without any wind. What did you say? He said those words in a hoarse and deep voice, giving her one last chance to take back those ridiculous words. However, the more Gong Yimo was forced, the more she retorted. At this time, although her face was pale with fear, she stubbornly repeated the words she had just said. I said that you love me, so you should fulfill my wish. Bang bang bang. Gong Yimo subconsciously hugged her head and shrunk back. She saw an invisible inner strength surge in the room. Gong Dai actually broke through at this moment, reaching the 5th level of wind and nature. Inner strength materialize. Debris filled the room. The people outside heard the noise and did not dare to run in to take a look. Even Lo Chi, who was standing at the door, could feel the murderous intent in the room. Gong Yimo closed her eyes and coughed softly. If she could open her eyes now, then she would understand what it meant to be faced with imminent disaster. The bone-piercing chill seemed to have materialized. Gong Yimo closed her eyes, but she felt her entire body tremble. She could not help but squint to look at Gong Dai. In the dust, he looked down from above, his eyes cold and ruthless. Even more crazy, those eyes matched with his demonic face. It was extremely beautiful, but it was so dangerous that it made people suffocate. He pulled out a smile, but that smile made Gong Yimo want to retreat. You said that you like someone else. But you want me to fulfill your wish. Gong Yimo did not speak, only stubbornly looking at him. He. Gong Dai covered his mouth and smiled. What was strange was that this somewhat feminine action was so stunning when he did it, making people unable to take their eyes off him. Come, royal sister, tell me, who was it that caught your eye when I wasn't around? Gong Che, Shen Shiyi, or Startling Cloud? Or is it Shu Yuan or Yu Ziqing? His voice was cold and emotionless, but it made people feel evil for no reason. Every time he called out a name, Gong Yimo's heart would jump. Just when she didn't know how to answer, he smiled strangely. Tell me what you like about him. I'll dig out my eyes and give them to you. I'll chop off my hands and give them to you. If it's my whole body. A dim light flashed in his eyes. If it's a whole person, then I'll have to drag it out and feed it to the dogs. After all, you and I are going to sleep together, and there can't be too big of a gift in between. His words were said slowly, but it made Gong Yimo more and more flustered. In a daze, she seemed to see the cold and murderous regent from her previous life. When he was torturing her, he was like this. The more afraid she was, the happier he was. She had obviously worked so hard, but she didn't expect that he would still become the person that made her afraid. As for wanting me to fulfill your wish, Gong Dai felt that this was like a joke, so he couldn't help but laugh. His laughter echoed in this small space, cold and bloodthirsty. It made Gong Yimo's heart sink even more. After laughing, Gong Dai lowered his head and kissed her cheek, not allowing her to refuse. His mouth used the most gentle tone to say the cruelest words. If you want me to fulfill your wish. In your next life. His words shattered Gong Yimo's last hope. She didn't understand why she and Su Miaolan were in different situations even though they were in the same situation. If Gong Dai knew what she was thinking, he would definitely tell her that it was because Su Miaolan couldn't even compare to a single strand of her hair. His fair fingers slowly lifted Gong Yimo's clothes, waking her up from her dream. "What are you doing?" She tried to retreat, but found that there was no way to retreat. Gong Dai sat on top of her, tilted his head and looked at her with a slight smile. "I want to check and see if Royal Sister has given something that belongs to me to someone else when I'm not around." He would do what he said. This knowledge made Gong Yimo tremble with fear. She hurriedly hugged her chest and said, "No, I'm lying to you. I don't like anyone, and I've never been approached by anyone." Gong Dai laughed. "I hate it when Royal Sister lies to me, so I want to punish you." Gong Yimo really had no other choice. She didn't even have the strength to truss a chicken at this moment. She was quick-witted and lifted her sleeves in front of him. On her arm, there was a small dot of chastity sand, bright and glistening. This was given to her by Empress Shui when she was born. "Look carefully. I didn't lie to you." Her voice sounded like she was about to cry. She was scared and complained in a hoarse voice. "How can you do this? I didn't lie to you." Gong Dai seemed to be distracted by that dot of chastity sand. Seeing her about to cry, Gong Dai seemed to be slightly shocked. Under this shock, all the hostility in his body dissipated. Finally, he revealed a trace of helplessness. He naturally knew that Gong Yimo was lying to him. Although he was far away in the western region, he knew her every move clearly. But when he heard that Gong Yimo used the excuse of having someone she liked to reject him, he couldn't help but go crazy. But when he saw the faint bruise on Gong Yimo's chin, he hated himself for being so rash. He didn't want to hurt her. He just couldn't help it. Even though he knew that Gong Yimo was lying to him, he still couldn't help it. Gong Yimo waited for a long time for Gong Dai's reaction. When she opened her eyes, she saw that Gong Dai was biting his lower lip lightly as he looked at that dot of chastity sand with a desolate expression. It was as if she made him unable to get what he wanted, and made him helpless. In this way, he turned back into an obedient little brother, and not the regent who wanted to take her by force. Just when Gong Yimo didn't know what to do, Gong Dai lowered his head and gently kissed that dot of chastity sand. Between his eyebrows, there was once again coldness and gentleness. There would be a day when he would personally erase this color from her fair arm. But now, she was so resistant, he sighed. "Royal Sister, don't lie like that again. I'm afraid that I really can't help it." He looked at Gong Yimo absent-mindedly. At this moment, she was in a sorry state, but because of the entanglement just now, it was hard to hide her desire. His Adam's apple moved. He closed his eyes and said in a low voice, "I'm afraid that I can't help but force you." After saying that, he felt a little hurt. "Don't think of leaving me. I don't want you to hate me." After saying these threatening words, he gathered his lapels and got off the bed. The room was already in a mess. He looked around, picked up a piece of clothing from a pile of broken wood, put it on, and walked out. Only when he closed the door did Gong Yimo let out a long sigh of relief. She had escaped a disaster. When she came back to her senses, she realized that her whole body was covered in cold sweat. Looking at the broken wood in the room, she couldn't help but stare blankly. Gong Dai really liked her. Chapter 160. A new set of clothes was quickly delivered to her, but she did not even glance at it. Her mind was still in a daze and she did not know where she was. The Gong Dai from earlier was too frightening. Perhaps that was the real him and all his previous obedience was just a disguise. Gong Yimo gently bit her lower lip as she hugged her knees and curled herself into a ball. Why did he like her? She was about to go crazy from this realization. How could it be like this? First it was Gong Che and now it was Gong Dai. She was a little afraid and in the depths of her heart, she once again had the thought of leaving. After her rebirth, the tension from her previous life had made her unable to consider anything too complicated in this life. If she encountered a problem, she would solve it. If she could not solve it, she would put it aside for a period of time. Perhaps it would get better on its own. As for the matter with Gong Dai, she could not solve it. Should she put it aside? Gong Dai was only 13 years old and was at the age when he was ignorant about relationships. It was also the time when it was easiest to change targets. As long as she disappeared for a period of time and Gong Dai married someone else, this relationship would be treated as a young and inexperienced matter and would be forgotten. But she glanced at her current state. Because she had taken the medicine, not only had she lost her inner strength, she also felt that her limbs were weak. In this situation, how could she escape from Chi Manor? Moreover, if she left like this, would it worsen the situation? For the first time in her life, Gong Yimo, who did not like to think about the consequences, began to seriously consider this possibility. If only she could turn back time, she would definitely be a good parent while she was raising Gong Dai. By the time Gong Yimo had finished thinking and changed her clothes, it was already afternoon. The moment she stepped out, she bumped into Shin who had been waiting for a long time. Seeing her come out, she smiled and brought over a cup of milk. "Princess, you must be hungry. Drink some milk to fill your stomach. The food is still warm and they are all your favorite." The cup of milk was still steaming hot. It was wrapped in a silver-beaded quilt and brought to Gong Yimo. She stared at the milk in a daze, then looked at the smiling Shin and asked in bewilderment. "You already knew. Gong Dai likes me." She didn't know why, but when she said the word like, she actually felt a little shy. Shin smiled and slowly retracted her hand. Her breath was like frost, and when she smiled, 2 dimples appeared. "Isn't it natural for His Highness to like the princess?" Shin Gong Yimo slightly frowned. She thought that Shin was timid and calm, but she didn't think that she would help Gong Dai hide it from her. "You know that's not what I'm talking about." Unexpectedly, Shin had a serious expression. "This servant knows what the princess means. His Highness loves the princess. This servant has known for a long, long time." She said it lightly, but Gong Yimo's eyes widened. Probably when His Highness was 9 years old. At that time, when the princess was sleeping, His Highness would think of ways to sleep with the princess. He would also intentionally or unintentionally touch the princess's face. Several times, this servant saw His Highness looking at the sleeping ewe with extreme longing. But at that time, His Highness was still young and didn't dare to do anything. As she spoke, she seemed to think that the blow wasn't enough. She blinked and said, "Everyone in the residence knows that His Highness has loved you for a long time. So, she was the last to know?" This blow made Gong Yimo become muddle-headed again. She unconsciously followed Shin to the dining hall. The room was heated. As soon as she entered, the hot air made Gong Yimo's spirit rise. She was just about to take off her thick fur coat, but she felt Gong Dai's scorching gaze. Her back stiffened and her hands stopped moving. Seeing her like this, Gong Dai didn't get angry. At this time, he was wearing a dark black robe with silver edges. His hair had probably just finished bathing and was only dried and draped over his shoulders. His handsome jade face was hazy white, but his eyes were clear and distinct. With such a smile, it was hard for anyone not to be moved. Gong Yimo's heart also jumped a few times. It wasn't because of admiration, but because of this impactful beauty. She suddenly remembered that in front of her, Gong Ju was always handsome, clean, and tall. Gong Yimo had never seen him sloppy. He always deliberately showed his most beautiful side in front of her. This boy's desire to court her was something she only discovered now. Gong Ju's feelings for her were always exposed. "Royal sister, come, sit down." There were only 4 dishes and 1 soup on the round table. Gong Yimo didn't like to waste, so the quantity was small. Although it was small, it was exquisite. The color, smell, and taste were all good. It made people's mouths twitch. There were only 2 seats at the table. Gong Dai sat on one, and the other was close to Gong Dai. This made Gong Yimo hesitate. But she was really hungry, so she didn't care about anything else. She walked to his side and sat down. Gong Dai was happy. He turned his head and ordered the people in the room. "All of you, leave." "Yes." Gong Yimo heard this and wanted to refuse. But when she thought that these people were with Gong Dai, it was useless to stay. But if there was someone, maybe Gong Dai would restrain himself a little. She wasn't that afraid. But Gong Dai, was he a person who would restrain himself? Gong Yimo hated being at a loss like this. She frowned in annoyance. But now she didn't have the strength. She could only use her wits. It's so hot. Let me help you take it off. Sure enough, Gong Dai couldn't wait the moment he saw her. They had only been apart for a short while, but he missed her so much. He couldn't help but want to be close to her. Gong Dai used a tone and strength that couldn't help but refuse. He smiled and undid the hidden button on her chest. In an instant, the fur coat fell to the ground, revealing her slender body. She was wearing clothes, but when his gaze swept over her, it felt like something had scraped against her body. It made her have the illusion that she wasn't wearing any clothes. She trembled slightly. The depths of Gong Ju's eyes once again burned with passion. But he held it in. He turned around and put a piece of shrimp tofu on her plate. They're all your favorite. Eat them while they're hot. The young man's voice was still cold and pleasant. Gong Yimo didn't know where the awkwardness came from. She lowered her head and muttered, I don't like to eat these anymore. She carefully looked at his expression with her big eyes. She tested him step by step to see how far Gong Dai could hold it in. Who knew that Gong Dai's expression didn't change? Royal sister, what do you want to eat? Now that he was rich, he could satisfy all her material needs. Gong Yimo thought for a moment and said, I want to eat chocolate, fruit mousse, macarons, and ice cream. Her words finally made Gong Dai's expression stiffen. He was like this not because of Gong Yimo's request, but because he suddenly remembered that Gong Yimo wasn't an ordinary person. She had unknown things in her hands. Sometimes, he even wondered if Gong Yimo was a fairy from the heavens. When the time was up, would she go back? This thought made his expression turn ugly. He thought to himself that he had to take her as soon as possible. She couldn't leave him. Chapter 161. His gloomy gaze fell on Gong Yimo's slightly aggrieved face, and he felt pity for her. Royal sister had not eaten yet, so there was no need to rush. If Royal sister knows how to make it, feel free to tell me. As long as it's something that can be made in this world, I'll definitely let you eat it. As he spoke, he picked up another piece of fish and placed it on her plate. He said softly, now, let's eat this first, okay? His coaxing tone gave Gong Yimo more courage. She deliberately snorted in dissatisfaction. I don't want to eat this kind of thing, I'm not eating it. Seeing her throwing a tantrum, Gong Dai couldn't help but sigh. How can you not eat it? If you don't eat it, how can I eat you? If you're hungry for too long, your body won't be able to take it. Gong Yimo didn't dare to look at him. Finally, she turned her head and said softly, if you don't give me the antidote, I'll go on a hunger strike. This time, it was as if she had touched the young man's reverse scale, causing his eyes to narrow dangerously. The effect of the cultivation dispersing pill only lasted for a week, but she was so eager to take it. Was it because she had already decided to leave him? No. He wouldn't allow it. Royal sister, if you don't eat your meal obediently, I'll have to use force. Gong Yimo straightened her neck and glared at him. I won't eat it, I'll go on a hunger strike. What can you do to me? She didn't believe that Gong Dai would dare to hit her. Unexpectedly, Gong Ju only chuckled, and his eyes lit up. Gong Yimo stared at him in a daze. He picked up a piece of tofu and put it in his mouth. Suddenly, he reached out and held the back of Gong Yimo's head, and directly fed it to her lip. Their lips and teeth instantly intertwined, and his voice became hoarse. If you don't eat it, I can only feed you like this. This sentence made Gong Yimo's eyes widen. While she was shocked and embarrassed, her heart was boiling with anger. Gong Dai, why did he dare to do this? But after all, she wasn't someone who would throw an egg at a rock. She gritted her teeth and hurriedly picked up her chopsticks, venting her anger. It's good to eat more. Later, she would take a good look at the things in her space. She must escape. Seeing that Gong Yimo was so docile, Gong Ju felt a little regretful. He licked his lips and looked at Gong Yimo's angry little face. His heart itched and gave birth to a trace of longing. He couldn't wait any longer. Today, he was going to completely possess her. No matter how independent she was, no matter how strong she was, she couldn't go against the entire secular tradition. To get her, he got her. That was no matter how. She was. To him too. As for whether they were blood relatives or not, he had long forgotten about it. He could have Gong Yimo change her identity. If she couldn't stay in the capital, she could go to the fief and live with him for the rest of her life. To look. To not to look to be to look to be to look. To look. To. But he sighed in his heart. Royal sister. She doesn't like me at all. He looked at his hands. He was handsome and capable. He was confident that he would become more outstanding. He would surpass all the men in the world. Plus, he could spend time with Royal Sister. Why did she have no feelings for him when he loved her so much? Royal Sister. What kind of man does she like? He believed that as long as she told him, he would become the man she liked. He would do even better than that. But when he thought about it, he felt that he was getting greedier. Once, as long as she was with him, he would be satisfied. Later, he was satisfied when he could have some physical contact with her to quench his thirst. But later, he felt that if he could be more intimate with her and kiss her more often, he would be satisfied. But now, he had done it. He actually hoped that she would love him back. Perhaps, he would never be satisfied with the person he loved. While he was in a daze, Gong Yimo put down the bowl and said in a muffled voice, "I'm done eating." Unexpectedly, her words were like an order. The desire that was brewing in Gong Dai's eyes quickly surged. She was done eating. He was still hungry. Moreover, he had been hungry for a long time. Gong Yimo's heart skipped a beat when she saw his expression. She suddenly regretted coming out. Why did she come out? She could have asked someone to send the food to the room. But the room made her feel even more uneasy. She shifted her body a few times, hoping to get further away from Gong Dai. She couldn't beat him in a fight, but she couldn't bear to hurt him. Gong Yimo was frustrated. She decided to reason with him again. Gong Dai. The young man's deep voice was tantalizing. Gong Yimo didn't know why she was blushing. She gritted her teeth. Do you know that it's wrong to go against human relations? Now, she could only use this to refute him. Gong Dai was in a daze for a moment. Then, he said, I know. Damn, why did you do that when you knew? Gong Yimo felt depressed. She said, we grew up together. You should know how important you are to me. This sentence made Gong Dai slightly happy. He felt satisfied when he thought about how Gong Yimo had rushed back when she heard that he was sick. If this care was out of love, it would be even better. Gong Yimo was still trying to persuade him. I know that you lost your mother when you were young. You don't have anyone by your side. I'm the only one who takes care of you. So it's understandable that you have such thoughts about me. Gong Dai looked at her with a pair of sparkling eyes. Did she understand his feelings? Unexpectedly, Gong Yimo changed the topic. But this admiration of yours isn't love. It might be a mixture of kinship and gratitude, as well as feelings for a woman. So, I think you've misunderstood. This isn't pure love. It's more of a curiosity. Because you don't have any other female characters by your side, you fell in love with me. Gong Yimo felt that her analysis made sense. However, she didn't see Gong Dai's eyes dim. After a long time, just as Gong Yimo was holding her breath and waiting for his reply, he sighed softly. He looked at her in pain and helplessness. I thought that the hardest thing would be for you to accept my feelings. He shook his head and smiled bitterly. But I didn't expect that it would be so difficult for you to believe in my feelings. His expression was so sorrowful. He seemed to be extremely humble, but he didn't expect that he could be even more humble. For no reason, it made Gong Yimo's heart ache. Apart from you, I've never been curious about any other woman. Apart from you, I won't tolerate it again and again. Even if I'm about to go crazy, I just want to get a kiss from you. I can't sleep at night because you're the one I think about day and night. I want to become stronger because of you. If you give me an affirmation, I can be happy for a long time. If you're dissatisfied, I don't know what to do. If this isn't love, then tell me, what is? Chapter 162. His words made Gong Yimo's heart sink to the bottom. Even if she didn't want to admit it, she had to admit that this young man, whom she had personally raised and treated as her family, had really fallen in love with her. However, this feeling didn't bring her any joy, only a heavy burden. She didn't understand, she just couldn't understand. After all, in the modern era, the marriage of cousins would be discussed for a long time, not to mention the love between children of a reorganized family. Even if they weren't related by blood, the strange feeling was better than being cousins. No. She had to leave. Otherwise, if she stayed, it would only make Gong Dai sink deeper and deeper. Was she going to start a relationship with Gong Dai? Her silence made Gong Dai sigh even more. He reached out and gently held Gong Yimo's hand, sighing, "It's okay, even if you can't accept it now, you will accept me one day." However, this wait was on the premise that he had her first. When she was sober, he would definitely not be able to bear it. Gong Dai even thought about drugging her. At this moment, Lo Chi invited him in. After entering, he didn't even dare to look at Gong Yimo, only whispering something in Gong Dai's ear. Gong Dai's gaze turned cold, and he looked at Gong Yimo worriedly. Pretending to be sick was a temporary measure. Now that he was in a position that could be easily touched, he couldn't keep being sick. Moreover, someone had told the emperor that royal sister was still alive, so he had to go and explain. "I have to go to the palace in the afternoon." As soon as he said that, Gong Yimo's eyes lit up, making him so angry that he couldn't wait to have her right now. In the end, he just sighed faintly. "Royal sister. Be good at home and wait for me to come back." Gong Yimo nodded her head repeatedly. That obedient look made Gong Dai even more worried. However, there was an emergency in the palace, so he had to go. With another sigh, he leaned over and kissed Gong Yimo's face. With outsiders around, Gong Yimo was caught off guard and blush. Gong Ju was once again tempted by Gong Ju's appearance. What should he do? He wanted to eat up royal sister every day. Gong Yimo was still unaware of his forbearance. She looked at him with a pair of big eyes, as if urging him to leave quickly. She was really a little vixen. He could always easily break through in front of her. If this continued, he probably wouldn't be able to enter the palace today. Regretfully, he left. Before he left, he ordered Lo Chi to surround Chi Manor so tightly that not even a drop of water could trickle through. Firstly, Gong Yimo seemed to have been exposed and he had to ensure her safety. Secondly, he was afraid that she would escape. Lo Chi felt that there was still a long way to go. The princess was such an eccentric person that it made him feel like he was facing a great enemy. However, Gong Dai said indifferently, "Find a few servants to guard her. If she really wants to leave and you can't stop her, kill one person for every step she takes." Will it work? Lo Chi felt that when the princess was ruthless, she could also be quite ruthless. Gong Dai smiled. When it is necessary to kill, royal sister is more ruthless than anyone. However, if it is because of a personal dispute that involves the death of others, she will give in. His words were light and casual, but it sent a chill down Luo Chi's spine. He suddenly felt that no matter how powerful the princess was, she would not be a match for his highness. How could a person who understood you so well, who even knew your thoughts, principles, and bottom line clearly, fight against someone who knew you well? After Gong Dai left, Gong Yimo let out a long sigh of relief. Only God knew what she had gone through today. Her mood was up and down, just like riding a roller coaster. Gong Yimo walked back and forth in the courtyard, digesting her food and thinking at the same time. How on earth could she leave? Space, environment, memory, what could she make use of? Moreover, the last time she left, she met with Imperial concubine Long's people. Since her attack failed, it was hard to guarantee that she wouldn't fly into a rage out of humiliation and use other people to destroy her, so if she stayed here, she would only be Gong Dai's burden. She couldn't help but recall the memories of her previous life. Although many things had deviated from the right track, there were still some that didn't. Suddenly, she thought of something and couldn't help but be shocked. The Emperor's birthday banquet was coming soon. She almost forgot that this was the Emperor's 50th birthday and there were many people who came to congratulate him. She could only blame herself for being too closed off recently. She didn't even receive such news. Calculating the time, it was already 3 days later. No wonder Gong Dai's health had just improved and he was called to the imperial palace. Now that Gong Dai was in charge of the safety of the imperial palace, for such an occasion like the birthday banquet, he really couldn't leave, so it was highly possible that he wouldn't be back for the next few days. This knowledge made Gong Yimo extremely happy. She still had the poison cleansing pill in her space which might be able to counteract a portion of the effects. Moreover, since Gong Dai wasn't around, she could think of a way to leave. Who knew, just as she was sleeping soundly that night, Gong Dai, he still came back. It was already late at night and the winter night was even more desolate. Gong Dai stood in front of Gong Yimo's door and heaved a sigh of relief. She was still here. Only God knew, he had originally wanted to stay in the imperial palace, but he used the excuse that he still wasn't feeling well and needed to go back home for a famous doctor to administer acupuncture. Only then was he able to finish his work and rush back. When he was busy, he didn't feel it, but on the way back, he was so afraid and terrified, afraid that when he came back, he would face an empty room. He softly pushed open the door. Perhaps because she thought that he wouldn't come back, Gong Yimo slept very peacefully. Her little face was flushed red and without inner energy, her hearing was only slightly better than a normal person, so she didn't even notice that a person had gently laid down beside her. Just how big of a heart did she have? A few days ago when the Crown Prince confessed to her, she was so terrified that she could calmly resolve it by turning around. But today, he had clearly forced her to stomp her feet several times, but in the end, the moment he left, she was able to sleep soundly without any trace of insomnia. Gong Dai couldn't help but sigh. This was his royal sister. If she could lie down, she would never sit. If she could resolve it, she wouldn't let it pass the night, and if she couldn't resolve it, she would throw it to the back of her mind. It made people love and hate her at the same time. Gong Dai's heart was stuffy and he lightly bit the tip of her nose. Gong Yimo woke up with a start. Seeing that it was Gong Dai, she was stunned and thought that she was still dreaming. However, the slight chill from his body made Gong Yimo hug her body and glare at him. "What are you doing?" Her appearance made Gong Dai laugh. He hugged her and rubbed against her body like a big cat, lazily saying, "Nothing, I just want to sleep with royal sister." His approach made Gong Yimo unable to treat him with a normal heart. Her whole body tensed up, like a little animal that was about to explode. Why don't you go to your room to sleep?" Gong Dai lifted his head from her embrace and said in a very innocent tone, "My room is ruined. I can only squeeze in with you, royal sister." Chapter 163. Gong Yimo finally shut her mouth and didn't say why don't you go to the guest room. Instead, she looked at him defensively. However, she saw that Gong Dai really just hugged her and closed his eyes. Gong Yimo heaved a sigh of relief. She knew that he was really tired. How could he not be tired? He had just vomited blood and his mood was so unstable in the morning. In the afternoon, he had to face the emperor again. The emperor didn't seem to be sure that Gong Yimo was in his residence. However, with the emperor's suspicious character, he would definitely send someone to investigate in the next few days. Then, should he hide Gong Yimo somewhere else? This question made Gong Dai vexed. Moreover, there were quite a number of people eyeing his position. He had only been sick for a few days and there were already people who couldn't wait to use the emperor's birthday as an excuse to say that he was unwell and wanted to replace him. However, how could Gong Dai spit out the food that was already in his hands? Therefore, with just a few words, he defeated the other party and took on the task of guarding the residence alone. After dealing with the emperor, he had to deal with the despicable people. Although he could deal with these despicable people with ease, in terms of ruthlessness, he could be more ruthless. In terms of conspiracies and plots, he could take every possibility into account. Moreover, Gong Dai was rich and knew how to calculate people's hearts. In the future, he would definitely be an opponent that everyone would be afraid of. However, he was only 13 years old and was not as twisted as he was in his previous life. His desire to fight for power was also not as strong. He would persevere and work hard, all for Gong Yimo. Only by becoming stronger, could he protect her and have the right to love her. Therefore, he endured his boredom and impatience and dealt with those people. He was really tired. Gong Yimo saw the deep fatigue in his expression and couldn't help but feel pity. If he hugged her then so be it. As long as he didn't move, she wouldn't lose a piece of meat. Moreover, if she resisted and forced him, what if he ate her up tonight? Thinking that she had to face this kind of problem at such a young age, Gong Yimo was speechless. Although it was early in her previous life, she only got married at the age of 18. Seeing that Gong Yimo did not resist, Gong Dai was satisfied. He hugged Gong Yimo and slept soundly, as if he owned the whole world. Just as Gong Yimo gradually lowered her guard and prepared to continue sleeping, Gong Dai slowly opened his eyes. Looking at the sleeping face close to him, his heart was abnormally peaceful. He only hoped that time could stop here. That would be the greatest happiness. The next morning, when Gong Yimo woke up, Gong Dai had already left. Before he left, he carefully tucked her in without making a sound, letting her sleep until dawn. Gong Yimo sighed. She accepted her fate and got up. She flipped her palm and several types of pills appeared in her hand. She now had medicines to stop bleeding, rejuvenate, and detoxify, but none of them could cure him. On the other hand, there were a few types of pills that she had brought from the other world that she could try. Suppressing the internal force could be said to suppress the qi and blood. Then, would the blood and qi promoting medicine in her space be effective if she ate it with the detoxification pill? Thinking of doing it, Gong Yimo gritted her teeth and swallowed the two types of pills. After eating lunch, Gong Yimo was pleasantly surprised. It was actually effective. Although she had only recovered 1/10 of her strength, at this speed, she would be able to fully recover in 1 or 2 days. This knowledge made her heart burn with passion, and her chances of escaping increased by a few notches. Afraid that she would be bored, or perhaps to monitor her, Shinna had been by her side. Gong Yimo thought for a while and suddenly said, "After being in the house for so long, I don't know what's going on outside. Shinna, tell me, what interesting news have you heard recently?" Shinna thought for a while and said, "If you want to talk about interesting things, other than His Majesty's birthday, it would probably be the Crown Prince's upcoming wedding." She seemed to have the intention to tell Gong Yimo something, so she said it in detail. The Crown Prince probably really likes that Miss Su, so he personally asked for the imperial decree to grant the marriage. Moreover, after the new year, the Crown Prince will be going to Huai River, so the wedding date is set to 1 month later. When Gong Yimo heard this, she sighed slightly. She didn't know what Gong Che was thinking. Although she wasn't a person who would go down a dead end, but one day he said that he loved her, and the next day he personally appointed another person to be his concubine. This person was even her opponent in her previous life. Thinking about it, it was quite disgusting. It was just that she couldn't control another person's life, so she let it go. "Is there anything else?" Seeing Gong Yimo's lack of interest, Shinna said again, "There's nothing else. It's just that the city has been very lively these past few days. Many adult princes and princes who were stationed in their fiefdoms have returned, and they even brought back many rare treasures. Many commoners are watching the show on the streets. I heard that the Elephant King, who was far away in the northwest, even brought back a huge eagle with a golden head to present to His Majesty. The Elephant King. The Emperor's oldest child, who had left for his fiefdom early." Gong Yimo's heart skipped a beat. In her previous life, after the Daiyu state was split into pieces, the Elephant King who occupied the northwest was quite powerful, and could be considered the biggest dark horse. In this life, he hadn't made much of a name for himself. He was probably a character who pretended to be a pig to eat the tiger. "There's also Nan of Gojosian," Shinna said. Daiyu state had 3 princes with different surnames, Prince Ping, Zhenshi of Gojosian, and Nan of Gojosian. However, this Nan of Gojosian indulged himself in wine and women, and usually, it was hard to think of him. Nan of Gojosian is in the extreme south, near the small neighboring countries. I heard that this time, he's going to present something very magical to His Majesty. Something very magical? Gong Yimo didn't care. In her previous life, when she came to the capital, the emperor was already 52 years old, so she didn't know what had happened. However, in her previous life, the emperor was very hot-tempered when he was 52 years old. Moreover, he was weak and sickly, and gradually became muddle-headed. In this life, at least until now, he was still a wise ruler. As she thought about it, she suddenly felt that something was amiss. Time flew. In the blink of an eye, Tomorrow was the Emperor's birthday. Gong Yimo hugged her blanket and thought about her escape plan. Gong Dai had already stayed in the palace for 2 days. Tomorrow was an important day, so he definitely wouldn't come back today. Therefore, she had to think carefully about how to make use of tomorrow's big day. These few days, Chi Mana's nights had been very peaceful. This made Gong Yimo restless. It seemed that she wasn't the only one who would take advantage of Gong Dai's absence tomorrow. Those who were spying on her, if their first attack failed, tomorrow would be the best opportunity to strike. Perhaps, the opportunity for her to escape lay with these people. As she thought about it, she fell asleep in a daze. In the middle of the night, she suddenly felt someone nibbling on her mouth. Only Gong Dai would dare to do this in Chi Mana. Gong Yimo glared at him and pushed him away. This push was very forceful, causing Gong Dai to be slightly stunned. Gong Yimo quickly changed the topic. "You. Why are you back?" When he heard this, he loosened his collar. That casual look was pleasing to the eye even when he was the one doing it. "The palace is quiet, so I came back to take a look." He said so. In reality, he missed her too much and was afraid that she would leave. Chapter 164. Ever since he had revealed his true feelings, his desire for her had grown. This desire had accumulated over time, and now that he had found an outlet, even he did not know how to suppress it. He could only seek comfort from her body. Moreover, he had always felt uneasy. That was why he had run back the day before the birthday banquet in order to completely possess her. He was too worried. He felt that only when he had her body would she be more honest. As for him, he had been thirsty for this day for a long time. Seeing that Gong Dai had started to undress without saying anything, Gong Yimo's heart skipped a beat. No way, Gong Dai couldn't be serious, right? He was only 13 years old. She did not know that there were people who got married at the age of 13. Moreover, this was their first experience of love. "You. What are you doing?" Gong Yimo stuttered when she was nervous. She had only just realized that she had this problem. Gong Dai was also very straightforward. He smiled faintly, and the entire room was lit up. However, his smile was stunning and also had a hint of shyness. This made Gong Yimo speechless. "I want royal sister to become my woman." Damn, Gong Yimo was stunned. Was he serious? No way, he was just scaring her. No way. "You can't force me. I'll be angry. I won't forgive you." Gong Yimo threatened him fiercely. Gong Dai's expression turned lonely for a moment. Then, he moved his fingers and took off his shirt, revealing his well-defined chest. "I know." He bit his lower lip and leaned forward. Using his arms, he supported himself above her. Looking at her pale little face, he revealed a hint of pity. "I know you'll hate me, but I have no other choice. Only, you can become my woman." As he spoke, he gradually pressed down. His hot breath landed on Gong Yimo's face, causing her to tremble. Gong Dai seemed to have taken a bath. There was a faint fragrance on his body. It was fresh and pleasant, but that was not the main point. She couldn't do this. How could she do such a thing with her beloved brother? Gong Yimo turned her palm and a dagger appeared. She clenched her teeth and stabbed forward, but was stopped by Gong Dai. His expression was indescribable, but the look in his eyes gradually changed and became dangerous. "Momo, you should understand. Don't try to anger me." As he spoke, he exerted a little force in his hand, and the dagger fell to the ground with a dull thud. Gong Yimo stared at him with her big eyes. "You said you like me. How can you sleep with me without a matchmaker? You clearly don't respect me, so I might as well die in front of you." Seeing her excellent performance, Gong Dai smiled and easily exposed her. "My royal sister isn't someone who cares about etiquette, and she won't seek death." He blinked and revealed a touch of tenderness. "But you're right. I should have a grander wedding. It's just that I don't dare to let you go now. In the future, I'll definitely give you a grand wedding." Facing a person who was unmoved by force or persuasion, and who understood her very well, Gong Yimo had no other choice but to cry. But she couldn't cry. She secretly pinched herself. She sucked in a breath of cold air and squeezed out a few drops of tears. She looked at him with watery eyes and complained. Gong Dai. Don't be like this, okay? I'm scared. Seeing her cry, Gong Dai was helpless. He gently wiped away her tears and sighed. It won't hurt. I heard people say that it will be very happy. Happy my ass. Gong Yimo was really starting to feel sad. What was going on? The brother she took care of wholeheartedly confessed to her, and the child she raised well wanted to eat her up. This change made her extremely uneasy, because in her heart, she didn't believe in love. She didn't believe in it at all. So when kinship turned into love, she was afraid. She was afraid that one day, she would be abandoned and repeat the mistakes of her previous life. Gong Dai. I beg you. If you love me, at least let me fall in love with you. Her words made Gong Dai's heart ache. Why did she not have any romantic feelings for him when he loved her so much? She said that youths were ignorant and longed for the opposite sex. But she was also youthful. Why did her heart feel like it was frozen? Why didn't she have any desire? But grief was one thing. He still couldn't bear to force Gong Yimo. The courage that he had worked so hard to muster disappeared under the attack of her tears. He only hated that he loved her too deeply and couldn't bear to see her sad. When had he, Gong Dai, ever been so careful with others? Seeing that Gong Dai didn't move, Gong Yimo was a little touched. Gong Dai, maybe he was a good person. It was just that in her previous life, the heavy karma, bloodshed, betrayal, and torture made her shrink back from love. She swore in front of Buddha that in this life, she would never love anyone again. Gong Dai actually caught her sudden silence and the fear and despair in the depths of her eyes. His heart felt as if it was pierced by her gaze. Why would someone as carefree as her be afraid of love? Her heart seemed to have a thick wall that rejected all love. He originally thought that it was only for him, but he didn't expect that it was for everyone. What exactly did she go through? Gong Dai didn't understand, but he felt even more disappointed. He hoped that he could participate in all of her, but there were some secrets that she would never tell him. Thinking of this, he finally made up his mind. With a pill in his mouth, he pressed his body down and directly pried open her teeth to feed her. At the end, he didn't forget to linger with her for a while. As their lips touched, Gong Yimo opened her eyes and looked at him blankly. Unlike his obsession and desire, she didn't seem to feel a trace of love. Her eyes were as cold as ice. Gong Dai seemed to be stung by this gaze as he hugged her and lay down. He sighed softly. I'm sorry. I don't have to force you, but I have to feed you another cultivation dispersing pill. You're hard to guard against. Just now when you pushed me away, I knew that you've recovered more than half of your power. Gong Yimo didn't say anything for a while. Just when Gong Dai thought that she was so angry that she didn't want to talk to him, Gong Yimo turned over to face him and took him into her embrace. Her sweet fragrance instantly wrapped him up. Her sudden change made Gong Dai feel a little helpless. He didn't understand what was going on, but he didn't dare to move at all, afraid that it was a dream. Gong Yimo patted his back. Her slightly tired voice came from his forehead. Sleep, I know you're very tired. This sentence actually made Gong Dai's heart tremble, and a sour feeling emerged. Their breaths gradually intertwined. Just when Gong Dai thought that Gong Yimo had fallen asleep, she suddenly said, Tomorrow, pay more attention to Nan of Gojosian. Gong Dai raised his head in surprise, but met her eyes that made his heart tremble. Her eyes were smiling and filled with pride. Have you forgotten what I've taught you? You're knowledgeable and have a photographic memory. As long as you seize the opportunity, you'll be more outstanding than any other man in this world. Gong Dai heard this and suddenly looked at her. His eyes were twinkling like a little deer's. If I'm so outstanding, why don't you have feelings for me? Gong Yimo continued to pat his back, but she closed her eyes. Sleep, even though he still had a lot of questions to ask, her sudden gentleness made Gong Dai not dare to do anything. Even if he was tempted, he didn't want to destroy this short period of harmony. He even wondered if he had taken the first step and succeeded in moving her a little. If that was the case, he was really happy. With this kind of happiness, he quickly fell asleep. The two of them hugged each other to sleep, just like when they were young. Chapter 165. The next day, people from all directions came to congratulate. In addition to the princes and princes, the vassal states also came with gifts, not to mention the other 3 states. They all came to the capital early in the morning. The long line of people made many people stop to watch, wanting to see what was going on. The palace was lively, and the people were celebrating. Gong Yimo could hear the sounds of gongs and drums in the streets even when she was in the room. She was waiting for night to come. Gong Ju's face was cold as he stood not far from the emperor. As far as the eye could see, there were luxurious clothes and pearls everywhere. The entire hall was bustling with noise and excitement. The sound of people drinking, singing and dancing, and the clanging of bracelets mixed together. Under the influence of alcohol and beauty, the atmosphere was gradually rising. Everyone's eyes were blurred and hidden. In such an occasion, no one would really get drunk. Just as Gong Dai was getting impatient, Crown Prince Che pushed away the others with a smile and walked toward him. "Why doesn't 9th brother drink?" Gong Dai looked at Gong Che, who was smiling warmly in front of him, and said lightly, "I have an important task, I don't dare to drink." When Gong Che heard this, he laughed exaggeratedly. His pair of gentle jade-like eyes fell on Gong Ju's body, but there was a sudden flash of coldness in his eyes. It was as if there was an icy blade hidden within, and he couldn't wait to pierce through Gong Ju. "This kind of small matter, I will do it for you. 9th brother is a prince, why do you have to do it yourself?" As he said this, he took a sip of wine from the cup in his hand, with a trace of indulgence and decadence. Gong Dai narrowed his eyes and looked at him, unmoved. Now, Gong Che's voice in the court was getting louder. A few days ago, the emperor issued an imperial edict, making the Liu family in the south the emperor's close officials. This made the Liu family the emperor's spokesperson in the south, the emperor's eyes and hands. Using the benefits of the canal, they helped the emperor to connect the north and the south, and consolidated the imperial power. Therefore, the Liu family suddenly became very popular. In addition, Gong Che was going to marry the beloved daughter of Duke Shunghua as the crown princess. For a moment, he was in the limelight. Seeing that Gong Dai was ignoring him, Gong Che smiled, but his expression was a little lonely. He walked forward, but the moment they passed, Gong Dai heard his cold and mocking voice. "Tell Moa that I'll be waiting for her to attend the wedding in 20 days. After saying that, he left without looking back. Gong Dai's expression was unreadable. He felt that the crown prince's actions were rather strange. He did not understand what the crown prince wanted to do, but this was also good. The royal sister must be very happy to see him get married. A strange smile appeared on his face. At this moment, the music gradually faded. Seeing this, everyone returned to their seats. Chang Shi came forward with a big smile on his face and a golden book in his hand. Gong Ju thought to himself, it's time to announce the gift. As expected, the first to be read were the envoys of the 3 major countries. The first to step forward was the general of Yu Qi. However, this general looked like a fair-skinned young man. Gong Dai had heard that he was the person who climbed into the bed of the Empress Dowager of Yu Qi. Gong Dai was secretly wary of him. The royal sister had said that in this world, people with courage, looks, ability, and shamelessness were very scary. The man in the light blue robe and silver crown took a step forward. There were many people following behind him, and each of them had a coachman protecting a congratulatory gift. These gifts were covered in red silk, and they looked to be of different sizes. There were many of them. The man bowed and smiled very pleasantly. Foreign official Shong Mingxi is here on the orders of the Yu Qi royal family to present a gift to His Majesty of Daiyu State. I wish His Majesty a long and happy life. Present the gift list. Present the gift list, the eunuch announced loudly. Someone quickly handed the gift list to Chang Shi. He opened it and began to read the gift list. As the names of the exquisite treasures were read out one by one, the people behind Shong Mingxi also revealed the gifts one by one. In an instant, the room was filled with the light of the treasures. Most of these gifts were from Yu Qi and Daiyu State did not. Therefore, they were especially precious. The emperor smiled and also gave a very precious gift in return. He showed the style of a major country. Send my regards to your country's Empress Dowager. Of course, Gongcheng knew who was in charge of Yu Qi at this time. However, to say that a woman was in charge in such an occasion would not look good on Yu Qi's people. It was another kind of pressure. However, Shang Mingxi did not seem to feel awkward at all. He bowed naturally and graciously. "Thank you, Your Majesty, for your gift. This official will definitely pass on Your Majesty's word." After Yu Qi, it was Yu Heng. Yu Heng also presented a generous gift. However, Gong Dai noticed that the leader would occasionally glance at an ordinary attendant behind him. He could not help but be a little more attentive. However, when it was Lu Yi's turn, it was a little strange. After all, they had almost started a war before. However, it was easily resolved by a brat from Dai Yu State. This unparalleled feat allowed Gong Dai to have 50,000 imperial soldiers under his command. Their status was revered. It could be said that they were second only to one person and above everyone else. However, all of this was based on Lu Yi's heavy losses. Lu Yi's people could not wait to eat his flesh. The leader was a bearded man. His fierce gaze swept across the room, making the atmosphere a little awkward. The people around him whispered at the right time. This time, his gaze was directly locked onto Gong Dai. The two of them stared at each other across the large banquet hall. They did not give in at all. The emperor's expression also became serious. He did not want to fight, but he was also not afraid of fighting. Lu Yi's people had always been ambitious. They had long seen the richness of the mainland and had been eyeing it for a long time. Who knew what kind of tricks they were going to play today? As the list of gifts was presented, everyone was surprised to find that the number of gifts they presented was not small at all. Emperor Gong pondered for a moment and decided to return an even more generous gift. However, he did not expect the bearded leader to wave his hand and reject his reward. "Your Majesty of Dai Yu State, we present a birthday gift for 2 reasons. First, to congratulate you. Second, to ask for a special gift in return." The emperor raised his eyebrows slightly. He was a little unhappy with the man's straightforwardness. "Oh, what do you want?" The man smiled and pointed at Gong Dai. The 9th Prince of Dai Yu State has 3 life tablets in his hands. Without the life tablets, their souls will not be able to rest in peace. Therefore, I would like to ask Your Majesty to reward me with the life tablets and return them to their rightful owners. He was still sober and did not make any excessive requests. He only wanted the life tablets. Those life tablets could be said to be Lu Yi's disgrace. They would clearly remember how a great battle was easily resolved by a brat from the other side. Therefore, those people had long been reduced to ashes. Asking for the life tablets back was just a fight for the last bit of face. The emperor did not hesitate and returned the life tablets. In his heart, he thought even more highly of Gong Dai. He was just a brat, but he had done so many things quietly. He had greatly humiliated Lu Yi. It was really satisfying. However, he remembered that someone had said that Gong Dai was harboring Gong Yimo. He did not know if it was true or false. The ceremony was still going on. The following gifts were also very amazing, making people exclaim from time to time. When Nan of Gojosian presented her gift, Gong Dai slightly focused. Due to his blind confidence in Gong Yimo, he believed that everything she said was reasonable. Chapter 166. Nan of Gojosian was a person who ate, drank, whored, and gambled. He was in his 40s, but he looked like he was in his 50s or 60s. His eyes were swollen, and it was obvious that he was not a good person. The emperor did not have a good impression of this person who relied on his ancestors to muddle along and wait for death, so he did not care much about his gifts. Who would have thought that after he presented a pile of ordinary gifts, he did not withdraw? Instead, he held a small box in his hand and presented it with a flattering face. "Your Majesty, I still have a treasure here. I'm sure you'll like it." The emperor waved his hand. Changshi was about to take it, but Nan of Gojosian refused and said, "This treasure, ordinary people don't know how to use it. Would you like me to demonstrate it to you?" Everyone's curiosity was piqued, and they stared at this place without blinking. The emperor slightly raised his eyebrows, thinking that a waste like him could not do anything, so he was allowed to go forward. Nan of Gojosian dragged his weak body forward step by step, and Gong Dai could not help but get closer. Then, he opened the box 2 meters away from the emperor. A strange fragrance came out. The emperor looked and found that there was some black paste inside, but he did not know what it was for. At this time, Nan of Gojosian took a tubular object made of pure gold and filled it with the paste. After lighting it, he handed it to the emperor with a tired smile. "Your Majesty, this thing is called Yunyang. It's a special product of a small country outside the border. Take a breath and your fatigue will disappear. It's the most suitable for your Majesty. Would you like to try it?" The emperor naturally would not use this kind of thing of unknown origin, but the strange fragrance floating in the air made him a little intoxicated. He even had the idea of giving it a try. But when he was about to reach out, another hand took it first. The emperor looked and it turned out to be Gong Dai. He looked open and honest, and smiled generously. "Father Emperor, listening to Imperial Uncle's magical words, this son is a little curious. Father Emperor, you don't mind this son to try it first, right?" The emperor's outstretched hand paused. He knew that Gong Dai was trying to protect him. He was moved. He had so many sons, but he was the first to rush out. His filial piety was commendable, so he smiled and agreed. Nan of Gojosian glanced at Gong Dai gloomily. "This thing has a strong after-effect and is suitable for adults. Your Highness is still young, so it's better not to try it." Gong Dai raised his eyebrows and said, "Enough stamina. Why didn't you say so earlier?" Feeling the emperor's sudden gloomy gaze, Nan of Gojosian was so scared that his face turned pale. He didn't dare to speak again. Gong Dai only took a shallow breath, but he realized that this feeling was really similar to the poppy cream that the royal sister had unintentionally mentioned when he was young. The royal sister had said that this stuff already existed, but it wasn't circulated to the mainland. Furthermore, the purification technology was limited. Long-term consumption would deteriorate a person's body and cause them to become addicted. Gong Dai's eyes slightly narrowed. Looking at the dazed gazes on the table, he knew that this was a wonderful opportunity. The emperor stared at him without blinking, but he heard Gong Dai say with a smile, "Imperial father, this thing does have a refreshing effect, but I've already used the only opium pipe. If your Majesty is interested, I'll ask Imperial Uncle to make you another one later." The emperor smiled and waved his hand, indicating for the banquet to continue. Night quickly fell. Gong Yimo sat cross-legged. Feeling the internal energy in her body gradually recovering, her heart finally felt a little more at ease. Suddenly, a few soft sounds came from the roof. When she opened her eyes, she heard the sound of close combat. Lo Chi ran in. Seeing that Gong Yimo was still there, he breathed a sigh of relief. "Princess, please follow me. There's an enemy attack." Gong Yimo obediently followed him. After walking out of the door, she saw that there were a few more corpses on the ground. The sounds of killing gradually died down. Looking up, she saw a bright moon hanging high in the sky. The first wave of people who had launched a sneak attack were all dead. Before Lo Chi could breathe a sigh of relief, someone hurriedly reported, "Not good, there are people trying to break in through the front and back doors." Luo Chi's face suddenly turned ugly. Were those people colluding with each other? If it was just someone trying to break in, then it would be fine. However, he looked at Gong Yimo, who was quietly standing beside him. She was the most dangerous person. However, Gong Yimo, who was being stared at by him, looked in the direction of the imperial palace with some worry. The bigger the commotion in Qi Manor, the more it proved that those people were fearless. There was only one reason for their fearlessness, and that was that something had happened in the imperial palace. Therefore, Gong Dai couldn't rush back. "Is what you said true?" The banquet had just ended. The emperor looked at Gong Dai and said word by word. Gong Dai lowered his head. "Every word is true. This thing can improve one's spirit at first, but as time passes, one's body will deteriorate day by day. One will also become addicted to it and be manipulated by others." While the emperor was muttering to himself, Gong Dai continued, "Nan of Gojosian definitely doesn't have the brains and courage to come up with such an idea. There must be someone behind him directing him. During today's banquet, this son's actions must have alerted them. Therefore, This son requests an imperial decree to arrest Nan of Gojosian as soon as possible to prevent him from escaping. He spoke so coldly that even Gong Cheng admired his decisiveness a little. Thinking of something, the emperor couldn't help but ask, "Then, you took a breath today. Will there be any problems?" Gong Dai paused, then said, "There's no problem." He spoke resolutely and decisively, but the emperor thought that he was afraid that he would worry. For a moment, the emperor was moved and allowed him to plead for leniency, quickly arresting the culprit and bringing him to justice. Gong Dai accepted the order and quickly led his men out. However, he didn't expect that by the time he arrived at the relay station, Nan of Gojosian had already escaped. He sneered and ordered his men to chase after him, while he himself led a group of men to Qi Manor. He had also thought of what Gong Yimo had thought of. He wouldn't fall for those people's trick of luring the tiger away from the mountain. The royal sister was his most important existence. Qi Manor had really fallen into a bitter battle. Apart from those who came to capture Gong Yimo, there were also those who came to kill her. Even though Gong Dai had left many hidden guards behind, it was difficult for 2 fists to fight against 4 hands. Lo Qi and the others were gradually unable to hold on. Gong Yimo's heart ached for those dead guards. She wanted to leave, but now she had been completely exposed. She could hide once, but she couldn't hide a second time. This time, if she was captured and the emperor couldn't find her, he would only vent his anger on Gong Dai. Therefore, she couldn't stay here any longer. She had to leave. Finally, when the number of enemies increased, Lo Qi could no longer care about protecting her. He locked her in a room and joined the battle. However, he never expected that Gong Yimo would have recovered her inner strength. The small room naturally couldn't contain her and she immediately escaped. In order to prevent more casualties in Qi Manor, the first thing she did after she escaped was to blast a wall with her explosive. The rumbling sound of the explosion was too representative, causing many of the people who were fighting to stop. Not good. She's escaped. Everyone knew that only Gong Yimo had such destructive explosives. Therefore, the earth-shattering explosion was like a signal. Although the enemies came from different camps, they retreated like the tide and chased after the explosion. Even the people from Qi Manor ran in that direction when they realized that Gong Yimo had disappeared. When Gong Dai heard the sound, his heart trembled. Not good. Royal sister is in danger. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.